All right, good afternoon and welcome to the mid-year retreat for the Tigard-Tualatin School Board, and I'll call us to order at 1:28 p.m. Oh yeah, I don't have.
Okay, hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And this is a little bit new for us in that historically we haven't typically recorded our retreats. But one thing that I would encourage everyone to do, even though this is a new element that we're adding to our retreats, is for us to treat this almost the same as we did in August, which is this should be a little bit more of a free flowing conversation. It's an opportunity for us to be able to look at our goals, to do some board business, and to really look at future forward without some of the constraints that we normally have, especially around time during our standard board retreats. And also, real quick, I wanted to thank everybody for making things work with their calendar. I know it's really hard to get people in this space for a long period of time, especially during the workday. And it's not missed on me too that it is very sunny outside in a time when it has not been very sunny, and it is very tempting to cut this meeting short and just go hang out outside. But we're not going to do that today. So I really appreciate you all for making the time today. Um, we do have a agenda, and in terms of facilitation, Chair Irvin and I will go back and forth in sharing the load on the facilitation. But we do have an agenda. If you want to go to the next slide, if you will, Gustavo. Thank you very much. And here's how we're dividing our time together. So we have up to 3.5 hours to 5 o'clock, and we'll do a warm welcome just to get relaxed and almost like an icebreaker. And then after that, we will jump in with our mid-year reflections, and it's a good time for us to be able to take stock of what we've been able to accomplish or what you all have been able to accomplish as a board and my role in that as a superintendent. Um, then we'll do some board business around committees and projects that you all are working on. And then because it is the long session, and I'm really grateful that we have board members that are working closely with OSBA on legislation, that we will spend some time looking at local and federal legislation that impact our schools. And then finally, we'll bring in a couple of guests, one to talk about the bond and give a bond update, and then we'll have our CFO come in and give you a more broad report of our financial updates. And this is going to be a little bit different than the conversations that we have in the boardroom. Again, the spirit of today's our conversation is our meeting is to have conversation and discussion. So you should feel at liberty to really engage in dialogue about budget, bond, or whatever it might be. And then we'll wrap up with superintendent evaluation. And it's the mid-year point, so it'd be a good time to get feedback, come to some agreements on format, timeline, and any modifications to my evaluation. So that's what we have on the docket for today. Chair Irvin, do you have any modifications?
I do not.
Perfect. So a little bad comedy sprinkled into the day. All right, so let's do a warm welcome. One thing that you all know that we do as a district is we really engage in art of community. And part of doing that is starting with a warm welcome. Can you switch the slide, Gustavo? Doing a warm welcome and normally an optimistic closure as well. So for today's warm welcome, we'll go in a circle, and I want you to choose and share on one of the things. One, describe what your perfect day would be. Yes, and no sarcasm. So, what was your favorite game as a child? It could be a board game. It could be a game that you played in the neighborhood. Um, what book or movie impacted you the most growing up? And what movie or show do you keep watching? And you know what? If you want to pick two, you can pick two. Yeah, who wants to start?
I'll start. So, because I'm now watching it, I think for the eighth time, the show I rewatch on a regular basis is The West Wing. And it's amazing that the show is now 20 years old, and the themes that it brings up are still completely relevant. And every once in a while, it's a little painful to realize that in 20 years we haven't moved at all. But the writing along the way is so good, and the characters are so good in the first 2-3 seasons in particular. The writing is so good. But yeah, I love it, and it feeds my policy wonk soul.
Are we just starting with the movie or show part?
Or just you could.
You just pick
No, you just pick one,
I
or
see,
yeah,
okay.
just any of them.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go with Cobra Kai because I just love watching that with my kids. We watched it during the pandemic, during the shutdown, and season 1 is hilarious. And they're basically, there's a lot of asides and references to the original movie, and it's so cheesy, but it's funny, and it's just fun to even like make fun of a little bit. And I feel like it's making fun of itself a little bit, so I like watching that one.
It's a great one.
I'll answer the one about which book or movie impacted you the most growing up. So, little known fact, I have a degree in opera, which I use all the time. But I knew I wanted to be a singer from the time I was little, but I didn't know that until I saw the movie Annie, the 1982 version, I believe, with Eileen Quinn as Annie. And I went and saw that in the theater and was like, what? What is this? And from then on, I knew I wanted to sing. So that movie impacted me the most growing up.
What was your favorite song in Annie?
In Annie?
Yeah.
Oh, just very cliche. It was Tomorrow.
That's a great song.
course, I mean,
Still like gets me a little choked up.
So that's my answer.
I guess describe a perfect day would be hanging out with you guys. I mean, yeah, that's a close second. I think that I think of many, but like when you're in an all-inclusive resort in Cancun, Mexico, and you just wake up, you can go grab your coffee and your breakfast or whatever, and you are sitting at the beach or on the pool, and you do that all day, and people bring you stuff, and yeah, that's a perfect day.
That's great. I'll jump in with mine. What is a movie or show that I keep rewatching? I find that I've watched Stand By Me. Like, yeah, many and many a times. And part of it, I think it's like one of those nostalgia movies. And even though it takes place like in the late 50s, early 60s, it feels like I would have grown up with those kids. And it was filmed in the area where I grew up. And it just gives me like my kids probably dread watching it with me because I'm like, yeah, you see that right there? That's Royal Avenue. That's Cottage Grove. We used to walk down, whatever it is. But I just love the nostalgia of that movie and seeing coming of age Stephen King story that kind of turns into a wholesome movie. The leeches.
Yeah. So I have a funny. Well, so the movie West Wing is actually one of them. And to your point, there's a podcast if you haven't, the West Wing Weekly. Oh my gosh, it's the best. Anyway, but the movie, my kids know my favorite movie of all time is White Christmas, and I will watch that all year long. And I will sing, and I know the sisters, like the whole thing. And so that is I will never stop rewatching that. But my funny, like the games one makes me laugh because I grew up in Eugene, and I had very, not like counterculture parents, but like very not mainstream in terms of like games. So we got like the Ungame. Do you remember that? Anybody remember the Ungame? Like there's no winner or loser. But we also had a co-op games. So I had Save the Whales, where you earned the golden barnacle. This is funny. I also had, yeah, On the Farm, where you learned about agriculture.
This is some real South Eugene stuff, by the way. This is not a North Eugene thing.
Correct. I was eating at Sundance Natural Foods and going to Saturday Market, and also playing Save the Whales down on the farm, and which I still have these, one called You Oughta Know Your Waterfowl, which is like, Mom,
Like a duck?
like all the water birds. I will bring it in and we can
Swamp-
play it
this is a
sometime. You ought to know your waterfowl. And my husband and kids are like, what did your parents do to you? Like, where is Monopoly and Clue, which we also had. But anyway,
Uno.
yeah, nope, didn't have Uno. But I know how to earn that golden barnacle. We did. We actually did have those, but these were like these are important. Like, you need to be an activist for the environment. So here's a game for it. So
That's really cool.
it's like the most South
I
Eugene
love that.
thing of all the South
I
Eugene
love-
things.
I
But
love
anyway,
that.
yeah. No, but we also had. Oh, I should do that. Yes. There's also one about like pipes, and then like a masterpiece one because my dad was an artist that we had to like, yeah. So fun times at the Franklin household. Okay. I will bring them and we can all play. Okay. Next board retreat.
Okay, so that wraps up our warm welcome. So yeah, I thought it was fun. Yeah, you ought to know your waterfowls. All right, that is for next board retreat. We will play one round. Is there a flashcard where they hold up like a picture of like a?
Game and like you gotta know it. And you have to like name what it is.
Does a seagull count?
It's like no, they're way more complicated. It's like the blue-billed.
Mallard.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, we are moving on to our next agenda item. Chair Irvin, do you want to co-lead with talking about our board goals?
Yes. So the next couple of things that we wanted to go over today and just kind of really just have a rich discussion about, hopefully, are the board goals. So kind of looking at what we set out and planned out in our winter or fall retreat, I guess. It seems like forever ago. But really those goal areas of learning together as a board, creating conditions for success, holding the system accountable, and supporting strong relationships. And so really just kind of thinking about, for those goals, those mechanisms for success, sort of where are we? What are we thinking in terms of where we've been successful? Are there, and really we don't need to go through necessarily, I think, all of the ratings, but I think those questions at the bottom in terms of where can we really find some areas of celebration and what can we take into consideration moving forward, modifications, and then any other goals. So just really kind of opening that up. And maybe first if people want to refer to their rubric in terms of, what their ratings were or why, that's absolutely fine. But we can certainly start with the areas of celebration. Folks want to kick it off there?
So you don't want to just step through.
I mean, we can do that way. Would people prefer to do that? You just go and we'll.
Well, okay, so I feel like a couple of areas of great success, I think, in create conditions for success, ensuring that all students and staff feel welcome, included, and empowered. I think we've done a really good job of providing space for students and listening to and working with all of our staff. That was really brought front and center for me when I was rereading the 8 characteristics of effective school boards, and the whole conversation about, does the board know what staff is doing with regards to professional development, and do staff know what the board members are doing? And I feel like we have a really good dialogue with our staff in that regard. When I walk into a building, they know who I am. They can have conversations with me about what's going on in the district. And yeah, I think that's a really major strength.
Definitely crack on that.
I'll speak on this one as well. I give us a very high rating on this one, and I will say, professional hat on for a second. This is one that's really hard for boards sometimes, is because they don't necessarily understand what this means. I think that when I'm looking at our mechanisms for success, we talk about AROI all the time, and so do staff, right? So I think there's really good alignment with what staff are paying attention to and like what the board expects in that way. We monitor data as a board, and like I think there's really good alignment between what our superintendent and staff know that the board is interested in and what we are interested in. And so like every single board meeting, there's something to do with data that ultimately is focused on or goes back to what students need. And then there are pieces in here about advocating for funding, and we've got 2 board members on LPC and who are actively advocating for funding. So, as I looked at creating conditions for success, I'm like, all of these, right? And I know that the curriculum adoption is going on right now. Equity lens is a really big part of this. And so I'm looking at all of these things, and I just think that all of these things are being hit with a really large contribution from staff, right? Like none of these are board alone. And so even though these are metrics for the board, like staff do so much of this. But for me, there was it was clear that there's a really tight alignment between staff and board on these.
Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned the advocacy piece because I didn't want to toot my own horn on that one.
I would agree.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say, you talked about advocacy a little bit, and you want to say just a couple words on that, because I'm just capturing some of these things.
No.
Okay.
Plus winning what Kristen said.
Plus winning.
Yeah.
Plus winning.
But I think we have done some, definitely advocacy work in terms of, learn as a board together, and we have that complete. Maybe we haven't completed a TTSD legislative platform, but we do talk about advocating at the legislature, and we're going to have a presentation on, the upcoming bills, and then with you giving a LPC update from last time, and we're attending those things, and so I know that we're always abreast of what is happening. Well, and over there works at OSBA, so it's like, so we're all in tune with what is going on, both in state, and then we hear a lot about the federal stuff that's happening, and we keep an eye out on that, and you do a great job reporting on how that affects what is coming next, or if it doesn't affect what's coming next. So I think where we're learning together as a board, and we're having this retreat where normally we haven't had it, this is another point of evidence for what we're doing.
I would also add, I think we have continued, and I think partially because the district does this so well, we're not sort of siloed doing something different, but our supporting strong relationships. And I think between new leadership, sort of rebuilding and building new relationships, and the board and the district continuing to engage different parts of our community and all parts of our communities, I think we have continued to do that. We have public comment, whether it's budget discussions or welcoming the new superintendent. There's been opportunities to get community input, demonstrate willingness to listen and learn. So I really think that that's another one. We can check the box for passing the local option levy for that strong relationships, and we will soon check the box for passing the school bond. So I think that's another area where we have continued to really show a lot of our strengths as a board in terms of how highly we function. Is just, I look around when we have meetings or we have community budget listening sessions or whatever it is, and I think it's just sort of woven into the culture now. Like this is just, we
Mhm.
all interact with each other,
Yeah.
and it's not this sort of anomaly, and it's not this new thing that's sort of like what's expected. And sometimes that comes with other pressures when we have created that, which is a really good expectation. But I appreciate that. I think a lot of folks who have come into in the last few years to a district that really has set that stage, I don't think there are people that realize 90% of other districts don't have the engagement and that sort of ability to converse and dialogue with each other between community members, board, staff, leadership that we do here.
What did you all think about goal area 1, where it said learning together as a board? And I see that mechanisms for success. There's some there's the OSBA conference or other professional learning or conferences you might have attended, and then of course there's the legislative platform, which we just talked about as well. Is there any thoughts on that one as you did a self-evaluation that we didn't discuss?
So I think the measurements that we have of attending the OSBA conference, I believe over half of us did. Certain people just didn't have the schedule to do it, and that's understandable. We didn't complete a legislative platform, but as Director Miles said, we have 2 people on the LPC. We're kind of working OSBA's legislative platform, which is a more successful way of doing it anyway. If we come out from the sides chipping at what we think is the number one, it's not as effective as if we can come together with a big body and say, this is what's important. But personally, I would like us as a board to do more learning together, the 5 of us sitting down with some sort of a facilitator or trainer, because that's a component we haven't had.
Yeah, maybe that's something we can build into a future work session, and also be really mindful to build into our summer retreat as well. And like create a schedule around how to incorporate that into continuous learning and not just segmented learning.
Yeah, I think somewhere I would have said the same thing, because on the other rubric, I had written after reading those, but sort of like a lot of districts might have that sort of schedule of that consistent process and cycle of board development. And so there are these sort of regular things. And it was saying something like, if you've been on the board for
Yes, the
10
lighthouse.
more years, it's this amount, 5 to 10, 0 to 5. But then also just sort of like we would with our schools, have that kind of what is our professional development plan and process, I think would be helpful. Then you can hit the board governance and kind of re-hit some of those things as policies change, as board makeups change, all that.
I would actually like to do some work on a legislative platform as a board. I think it would be useful to there's so many bills, and I know we have people really engaged individually, but that's different than the board being engaged together. And I think that would help just do it together. I mean, not that other engagement's not also really helpful, but it's hard to know how to advocate if we're doing it solo and without knowing what any larger, like if the district has a stance, or are we just completely following OSBA? OSBA is great, but they don't necessarily, like we're not going to line up 100% every single time. I don't think maybe much of the time, but I don't feel like that's like granted, because we're different than the average, right? Like OSBA on average is a little bit different than the state of Oregon. I think it skews, or maybe not different, but I think it skews a little bit more rural compared to TTSD. Kind of like because of the membership, the way it works.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we can certainly ensure that we are communicating to the full board is when we have those OSBA sessions, and like to the legislative little dinner thing that we had when all the folks came, like we had a 1-pager, Forest Grove had a 1-pager, and we do work, and this is the part where I think as OSBA or LPC members, we can better inform or not assume that everybody is seeing these documents or whatever when they're sent out, but really like, here is Forest Grove, Beaverton, Hillsborough, all of these districts across counties have aligned on certain things and their numbers are different and their specific needs, to your point, Crystal, might be different, but like sped funding or not just adequate, but appropriate allocation, things like that, that are kind of that 40,000 foot level everybody needs. And then how does that drill down to each district? And then within that, we do have partnerships so that we can go to DC and say sort of the same message, that it's unified, and also how is it specific to each district. So I think we can do a better job at communicating those things out, so folks can really see, the community, every board member can really see, these are what we are specifically advocating for at the TTSD level, and how does that fit into the OSBA or the regional priorities as well.
The other thing is, in part 2 today, we're going to be doing some legislative updates, state and federal, and so that might be a really good time if there's bills that like when I'm reporting on it, that one interests me, then maybe we as a board can have either a work session or just a time during a board meeting to discuss it and decide whether or not we want to do a board resolution regarding support or not for a specific bill that we could then send in. So that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
I want to move us along just a little bit, just for the sake of time, and try to hit goal 3 and goal 4. So goal 3 is hold systems accountable.
I think for that one with the EEAC, we do a good job when we talk about all of our SIP plans and bringing in that committee to look at what the SIP plans are doing in terms of the ISH plan, and then having them come and present to the board. I think they did that just 2 board meetings ago or 3, so they're giving us those recommendations. They're making sure that we're implementing those recommendations, and so I think that that's one of the things that we're doing well within what we can, within what our governance is.
This one I gave a slightly lower score on than the others. It's not crystal clear in my thinking, but I kind of wrote that I feel like we have all of the pieces and we haven't just fully put it all together yet. We have the EEAC and we have our ACC policy and we have our old sort of ISH plan and we have a policy work group, but I still feel like all of that being put together in a way that also isn't too much of a strain on staff in terms of like the data review for outcomes and the student rights and responsibilities handbook, all that piece. Like, how do we balance wanting that data while also being very mindful and cognizant of the work that it takes to do that? And also, how do we then monitor and adjust if we don't have that? So I feel like this is one where we are getting there, and just need to probably look at this and very strategically discuss and plan how we do it, because it's not happening sort of on its own.
I give this one a little bit of a lower score too. And part of it was that, like, we just haven't done these things yet because it may not be that time of the year yet also, right? So we're not at the end of the year. And, but also, I mean, to your point, Tristan, like, not all of this is cohesive yet. I mean, like, how do you make this all a whole thing? Not that we built all of these metrics necessarily as all of this has to be a bundle, but as I looked at this, I thought, right, but how do all these pieces fit together where they do become one sort of big meaningful thing? Not to say that we are not tracking and trying, but I really like your point about how do we also not overload staff when we are looking for these metrics to be met.
I think that some of these are like maybe we just haven't gotten to them yet, but it would also be good to make sure we put like each item on the agenda. And I think like the annual equity audit, that's a little bit of a heavier lift, which is good that it's annual. I think, yes, it is annual. But some of these other items, I don't know that we necessarily need like an elaborate analysis. Like we have that data, and even just like the data, maybe run an average. Like I don't need it to be super pretty. Like I think that at some point, like just a quick rundown of the data, maybe it's a template that just gets updated. I don't think it has to be like, I think the information's more important than a bunch of like bells and whistles that eat up staff time.
Yeah, what we try to do is provide a balance, because my general sense is that the board has confidence in my staff that these things are happening because of the groundwork that my predecessors laid out. And so what we try to do is find the sweet spot. And this Monday is going to be an example where we have a work session. Is that this Monday? I believe we move things around. So I believe this Monday we're going to show you all or on the 10th. Sorry, I'm getting a little my calendar a little mixed up publicly. Sorry. So on the 10th, we're gonna do a quarterly review for you all, and that was really strategic when we laid out when we would do that annually, because it allows us to show you the vitality of like how we're progressing towards academic goals and key performance indicators related to everything from third grade on track to attendance, ninth grade on track, and importantly, graduation. And so that's not something we'd probably give you like once a year might seem too light, and doing it routinely might seem too like routinely meaning monthly might seem too much. So finding that sweet spot, and it also depends on when the calendar of some of these assessments. That's the data gathering tool. When the calendar of that falls, and then for us to be able to process in a way that's meaningful and concise to the board. So that's what our strategy has been. And I guess what I would just ask is if there's ever a point where it feels like you don't have enough data, you can let us know, and we'll determine the right medium to provide that to you, whether that's in a consent agenda, whether that's in a formal presentation, or just something that you have access, a link to in a weekly update. We're really pleased to do that for you all.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of the data more often, but straight data isn't all that useful because there's
Right.
always some explanation of, well, these numbers are going to be
Context.
higher than whatever. And so I really appreciate having a little bit of that context. And so as you say, there needs to be a little bit of a balance between the data and the explanation. It doesn't need to be in-depth, but just by the way, remember these parameters.
Yeah, especially one good example is if we're looking at focal group data on student achievement, and we're seeing, I'll use our Native American population. You'll see some years that graduation rate is going to be 100%, and the next year it might be 0, depending on the cohort identification and
Small numbers.
Small numbers, So we want to be able to provide that context to you, so it doesn't seem like we did a 180 and give us too much credit for what we're doing, or also get too alerted if there's been a change in maybe 2 or 3 kids that looks way more significant on paper. So those are things we like to be able to give you context for.
So just to make sure we cover these kind of things, I think, are all these items on the agenda at one point or another? Because I know there was a pretty comprehensive kind of agenda planning exercise at the beginning of the year that just kind of folded in all the things we
Yes.
expected to review.
Yep, they're all on a board planning guide that we review with you all at some point. Like, here's what you can expect to see, and every now and then we push those dates out. So the March 10th date is something that we pushed out from February because it gave us enough time to process some data around graduation.
Okay, that's great. And then I know we had the behavior policy as quarterly or as needed. I don't think we've been doing it quarterly, but it's so new. Do you all recall where we had that on there?
We did one earlier in the year, and we're going to do another one on March 10th.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's
So
pretty
that's part of
close to
that.
quarterly. If not, it would be 3 times a year.
Yeah, that
And then
makes
if we did
sense.
one in the summer, it would make it quarterly.
But maybe we wouldn't do the summer because that
Yeah.
might be
It would be,
less data.
would be a good time for you to see end of the year data and then compare it from the complete year from the year before. So we can definitely build in a summertime review, like in June.
And I just want to make it clear, for me, when I'm saying that this one we didn't do quite as well on, I would give us a 4 on it. I think we're still above average for most districts. I just don't think we're super high flying, high
We
performance.
just got to get to that 5.
All right, and number 4.
All right, here we go. Number 4. So support strong relationships. And then you can see the criteria on building positive relationships in the community amongst staff and engaging the community in the importance of local option levy and school bond. So who wants to start with their reflections on this?
I actually really appreciate the relationships with, like between our leadership and our teachers union, and the contract being settled in a pretty good time frame, especially during these days of inflation and difficult budgets. So I think there's always more work to do, and like always good to hear more feedback from our community. But I think that that there's been a lot of good work in that area.
I think that the district as a whole does a really good job with this. I mean, again, I think it's board and staff together, and then board participates in this. I mean, we have public comment, which we don't get a lot of, but it's always open. There are all kinds of listening sessions and committees and things, that, I mean, the community budget committee, and I mean, there's community members on curriculum committee, and there were the listening sessions earlier for you to be introduced, and I mean, there's always something for a community to be involved in, and I really appreciate that. Obviously, successful bargaining, pass the levy. You don't do that by a large margin. You don't do that without community support, and we've always got time for staff at board meetings. I mean, and not just cabinet, but other staff, there's space for them to come and present as well. I mean, not to say that there's not always more work to be done, but I think that there has been great space made for, and a lot of effort made toward that. I know that there are lots of local relationships with not only local governments, but local community groups and organizations as well. And that's really important to our district. And our students help make those relationships too. I mean, they come and present about that. And so I think we do a really good job in this area.
And I mean, we haven't had a lot of public comment lately. And that's unfortunate because we want to hear from the public, but it's also true that you don't hear from your public when they fundamentally agree with what you're doing. They'll let us know in no uncertain terms when they don't like what we're doing. So in some way, not getting public comment means we're on the right track. And if we're not, then please come give us public comment and tell us.
I just had a slightly different take on this. I think we're doing a good job with offering the public comment and providing those outlets, but where it says if we are maintaining positive relationships with district staff, I know that like with cabinet and with the people that come to the meetings, usually we do, but with I don't know that we're have positive relationships with like the teachers or the classified personnel, because I don't know that we get to hear from them that often, or that that they come to the meetings, or that we're out there in the buildings. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we all kind of work, right? So well, some of us work. And because of that, we having day jobs, we don't really get to go out there and and have those conversations, or maybe you know, have those listening sessions with them. And I think that before we say, "Yay, we're doing really good," and make a lot of people mad, we should acknowledge that yes, we're trying, we're doing good in these other areas, and maybe we need to bring that more to a focus.
I agree. There's more work to be done. I do think it's headed in a better direction.
Yeah.
But I hear you. I think there's still some things to do there and continue working to make improvements. Although, as someone who does work during the day, I don't think it's the only way to meet with people is like in the classroom between 8 and 5. But I mean, if we could, right? But
Right.
I think there's other ways to get input too.
No, there is, but it's how we always talk about if we're being responsive to people's needs. Like we ask parents to come to us. We instead of us going to parents. Same thing with like teachers. If we just ask them to come to the board meeting rather than us going to them, then it's not being responsive enough.
Well, and I think that's just part of sort of building reciprocity in relationships. And so
Mhm.
when that trust is there, it doesn't feel like such a formal thing to come to a meeting,
Yes.
but we've also come to their spaces if and when we can, or evening activities. Because I think it's true.
Mhm.
I think it's an okay thing to acknowledge that for many of us, it's not easy to get into buildings during the day. And I think teachers, and I think one benefit too is that we all have had or do currently have kiddos in the district. So there are these little pockets where we are seeing teachers. It's often with our parent hat on, not our
Right.
board member hat. But so we're getting little snippets, but I do think that sort of more universal ability to kind of hear and see and understand what other folks might be feeling or experiencing is always helpful. And then finding kind of working with, I think when the relationships are there, then you can work with the teachers, staff, schools to say like, where else can I kind of come into this space that so I can be there, but it won't necessarily be at 8 to 5, like.
And I've been invited by some teachers into their classrooms this year. And when I'm invited, I go. I'm a little nervous about kind of approaching somebody and just saying, hey, here I am, a board member, and I want to drop in and see your class. That can be a little bit intimidating. So I think the rubric metric that we have, which is demonstrate willingness to listen and learn from classroom-facing professionals, I think we do that in that if they ask me, I will come.
Well, and I think like how we used to, or I've done this year, like you just talked to the school, so you get like an overview. It might not be a specific teacher, but we can still go, it like, hey, can I come visit fill in the blank school or Rutkin, whatever. And then we get to see some things that are happening there because that's not maybe a school I would normally go to. So that is a way to kind of say, hey, can I pop in? It's not putting undue pressure on individual teachers, but we do get to see just be in different environments, which I think is helpful.
I think also there's in some ways no mystery as to what input is coming from staff. We receive significant input from teachers, and I know people sometimes really feel like they're putting themselves out there to send messages in because they're basically going to the top and potentially fearing for their positions. So I think that when that input does come in, it's important to really look at it and discuss it and think about that and how we can respond, because it's not like people haven't sent in input. I mean, there hasn't been as much lately, but I think when it comes in, like step one is to listen when it comes in, and then there's always more work to be done as far as like soliciting more and making sure it's balanced and that kind of thing. But I mean, I don't think it's mysterious at the same time. Like people have spoken at board meetings, they've sent in emails, we've had conversations. So I think we know what that input is, and we just need to do our best to honor it. And of course, we have our constraints, right? Like I mean, we're going into another tough budget year. I'm really disappointed with the lack of investment in Oregon. I know there was a lot of concerns about class sizes. That's going to continue to be an issue. So I think there's always more work to be done here.
Got you. Thank you very much. So we have some essential questions at the end. And what I'd actually like to do is I feel like these questions would be better answered after we talk about the our self-assessment of the 8 characteristics of a high-functioning board, because the goal was to take this document and this assessment and then our board goals, and then determine if there's any modifications to your goals going into next year or for this year, and also what kind of needs do you have individually as a board and collectively as a board. So can we transition into this document?
I just had one more thing.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, didn't want to cut it off prematurely.
No, I should have brought it up sooner, but I didn't quite realize we were done with the second one. I know there was some really bright spots in there with like making sure everyone feels welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But the pandemic learning loss, I think we've worked on that, but the data is just so persistent in this gap. And I think it's so hard to make progress in this area with our limited resources. But I do think it's something to just not forget about because it's kind of an ongoing challenge.
Definitely. And one thing that I might encourage us to do too, looking forward, is now that we're almost 5 years, we're 5 years past the beginning of the pandemic, that we can definitely see areas where we've had recovery, and then we just have the new reality, and it's closing the gaps in the new reality that we might have, especially around achievement or attendance or whatever that might be, is a way to continue framing it moving forward as well. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, we're ready to move on to the 8 characteristics of effective schools.
Let's do it.
There's nothing like assigning your bosses some homework. That always feels good. Yeah, I did get a little bit of help from Director Miles in finding the right document. I wanted something a little longer, so she went with this one.
Yeah, exactly. I could have just read it out loud.
So let's do the same process, and I'm actually going to set a timer for 20 minutes for us to process this, just to kind of keep us on track. If you all, it seems like a little ambitious, doesn't it? Let's set a timer for 30 minutes to kind of just go through the process. How does that sound? Alex, how are you doing for time? Is he gone?
This is right behind
How are
you.
you doing for time? Okay, can you stay busy for another half hour? Well, we're just launching into this. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you. Yeah. Okay. Let's jump in.
All right. So we'll just follow the same process as before. So that first characteristic, commitment to vision of high expectations for student achievement, quality instruction, and clear goals towards vision.
Well, I think we've just proven we have goals and they're aligned with curriculum and instruction. So I think we got this one.
If this is redundant, it could be really quick to go through some of these. Yep.
I actually think that having a vision of high expectations for student achievement can really mean like different things to different people, because I feel like there's a tension between meeting people where they are and making sure they have what they need and expecting to be able to get there. And so I think it's just like an important point of tension, because if you're so concerned with, I feel like if you're so focused on barriers, you want to remove them. But if you think that they can't be overcome, then that becomes a problem too.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we focus so much on productive struggle, right? We have our kids working to overcome so that those barriers don't become unsurmountable.
I think that we do with our strategic plan and those goals and action steps, all of that, the AROI. I think that moves really positively towards this particular characteristic. I would challenge, and I guess my own challenge to, like, one of the quotes was, boards were sometimes aware of goals, but seldom able, I don't think this is us, but seldom able to describe actions being taken by staff members to improve learning. And I don't think seldom or sometimes, but I just would like want to challenge my own self to make sure that based on our goals, our strategic plan, I would be able to, when I go into a building, identify, describe, or see those like whatever those actionable steps are that we have in our strategic plan, see that in those schools and vice versa. So staff and principals and leadership can kind of like reversely connect what they're doing back to those board goals. And I think overall, I think we do a good job at that. But as individuals, I would want to just tighten that up a little bit, just in terms of our own practice, or my own practice.
So this was actually going to be something I was going to, it came for me a little bit later in the document, but since you brought it up, a very explicit connection between the PD that our teachers and staff are undergoing, described to the board as this PD links to this goal, this standard that we've got. And I think that it's a very small connection to make, because we do it. We do this work, we do this work, but just an explicit connection of the two would be useful.
Yeah, I think just to jump in real quick, from what I've seen, again, predecessor laid this out, and I'm just trying to do my best work to elevate our progress towards goals. But I think with our strategic plan, in the way that it's incorporated into our AROI and our financial AROI, I think that you see a lot of integration with what we're trying to do, and we're getting close to a time period where we need to re-up our strategic plan, and I think that will be an opportunity for us to take the input here and get hyper focused on the areas that we want to achieve, the things that we want to achieve. Right now, my assessment is it's a little broad, but it also feels like the board's able to point to those things that we're doing as well, just in the conversation that we're having today.
All right, we can move on. Stop me if you want, but we'll move on to number 2, shared beliefs and values about what is possible for students' ability to learn and systems' ability to teach all children at high levels.
This is one of the ones that, when we've talked about this at board meetings, where that shared belief that all students can learn, shared by all board members, measurably impacts students in a positive way. And I think we all share that belief. I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't believe that all students can learn. Again, not at some arbitrary testing metric, but just in their ability to learn, and to your point about meeting them where they are. The other piece of this is, in the last half of the sentence, is about what's possible for students' ability to learn and systems' ability to teach all children at high levels. Really thinking of that whole system, and that doesn't necessarily mean that like all the time we have just, blind confidence in the system, but really examining the system, that board members are interested in the system and know enough about it to know when it needs improvement as well. And so there is that that informed piece, that we're not micromanaging and we're not rubber stamping, that there is interest in the system enough to remain engaged in it. And I do think that this board is constantly interested enough in that, that positive, informed piece. We want to be informed enough to keep in our role at that systems level.
Yeah, I struggle with this one when it comes time to look at curriculum, because we have some courses that are not quite as difficult. They might be more of a fun elective. They might get at special interests. And then I feel like we have other ones that are more challenging, and I think we need that mix. But then I worry about like how much we're using resources on uh, the former instead of the latter. And sometimes that's hard to define. But when we have to do cuts, I think that's something to really keep in mind of like, are we just making sure students can get through, or are we making sure they're being challenged because we know they can do it? Because we only have so many resources. And so I'd rather have it be a little more challenging, and like maybe there is that some kind of productive struggle sometimes because we know you can get there and that you're farther than you would have been if you hadn't had that challenge. And so I worry about that a lot with how we're using our resources.
I think so. I think overall, um, I think we do this one incredibly well. We hold these beliefs and these values, and we have the ability to kind of like do root cause analysis and recalibration at school or the district level to kind of when these systems might not quite be working. And in terms of high levels, right, or what's challenging, so much of this is subjective. And so I think, and it kind of goes off track a little bit, but I do think we do have multiple pathways for students to engage and be challenged. And it might be arts driven, it might be language driven, it might be STEM driven, it might be strict IB academics driven, whatever it is. But I appreciate that we have those pieces, and we do have challenges when we have budget restraints and all of that. But I think also kind of keeping in mind that I think we do a good job at what do we need to do and looking at the whole child and ensuring that there are entry points for all types of learners, all interests, while ensuring that they are getting the kind of core curriculum as well.
And the gist of this point number 2 is not not necessarily, well, let me rephrase it. The point of this is, do we as a board believe that students can learn? And that if we were failing in this one, it would be, we don't think students can learn because the economics, because their parents don't support them, because the kids are dumb, whatever it is. I have never heard that stated in this boardroom, that we don't think that students innately can do the work.
And we're not making like the examples, or we're not making excuses when the data comes and it's not always great. And if that comes up later, I think too, is we are really able to look at hard data, and hard being like not great data sometimes, and where are we still missing the mark, and not making excuses for it, being like, well, that's not really our fault, so moving on. It really is like what adult behaviors need to change so that we can improve student learning. And I think that as a district is kind of life-changing for sort of the overall shared values within the system.
And I think, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's just important to keep in mind that like our actions are communicating what we think. So when we offer like challenging curriculum, that demonstrates that we think children can learn at high levels. And if we offer like study hall or something, there might be logistical reasons for that kind of offering, but like it's not quite delivering the same message.
Thank you.
And I think we'll get to that more in number 6.
Should we move on to number 3? So that is accountability driven. So I modified it to try to fit it in like, for space issues. So just so you know, accountability driven, spending less time on operational issues and more time focused on policies to improve student achievement.
I'll say 2 quick things about this one. This one could be hard for a board in which the majority of the board are active professional educators. Right? Where I think it would be easy to be operational, like down in the like, we want to have strategies or think up strategies. That would be difficult. I will always always advocate coming back to the question of what is the board's role? Like that, that is in me. And so, but I think we do a good job of that. And there are times where we've had to come back to that question of like, what is the board's role? We need to pull back. We need to pull back. But I think we're pretty good at coming back to that question. And I think we are pretty, I mean, do a good job with that accountability piece. I mean, we talk about the strategic plan quite a bit in our conversations and look at monitoring and you know, and try and focus on, again, data and staying out of operations. Again, I think there are times where we get a little, you know, but that's okay. We can always pull out of that.
I think it's hard because the public perception of what the board does is that we do this operational stuff. And the reality is that's not board work. And so there's this constant push and pull of somebody saying to you, but you need to do this. Like, well, yes, that needs to be addressed, absolutely, but that's not board work. And that's a very hard thing to manage, that push and pull. And not come off as being aloof and that's not my job.
I will say to us what I say to everybody in my professional life. Nobody knows what a board member does, and neither did you before you got on the board.
Yeah, I had, I liked I pulled it out from the article, just the sort of the board's quote, which is, these are the results we want to see. You are in charge of how to do it. And so that is really the strategic plan and then the district's charge and really ensuring, and it's hard, number one, because you care, us as the respective body of this board, we really care. And I think sometimes we want to be in some of those weeds, and also really what is the board's work and what is work for the building and cabinet, and how do we kind of respect that boundary in a way, and allow them to do their thing, and we can have that, not oversight, but that, again, that question, like, this is what we want to see. Here's how you all, which is what they did in the strategic plan, the district decided this is how we're going to get there. And really asking questions based on that instead of, you know, it can get tenuous when it feels like, are we getting too far out of our lane? And like, how do we kind of, the accountability pieces for how we're bringing ourselves back in the lane so that the work can continue.
What else? Characteristic 3. Characteristic 4. So effective school boards have collaborative relationship with staff and the community member. We kind of went over this already, but again, just if anyone has one last thing to add on this one, please feel free. I think it says something that we are seeing that our goals are aligning with very specific characteristics that contribute to a healthy school board. So
I would love to find a way to measure the part that is in a healthy district. Staff members describe the boards as supportive, noting that the public officials would respect and listen to them. And I would love to have a way to measure that.
yeah,
I think we're doing it. I think I listen to staff. I think they think I'm respectful, but I don't know.
I'll make a note of that.
I think we got some feedback about that before.
Trying to find my notes.
Like one question at the end of the survey, what's the name of it? Pulse?
Upbeat?
Upbeat. I knew it had
Yep.
something to do with rhythm.
So the pulse. The metronome survey. So we are giving the Upbeat survey, and I'll look into seeing if there's an item on there that that gets feedback on school board relations. Anyone else on number 4? Again, we already covered a lot of this in our last section, so let's go ahead and we'll make up for some lost time. Let's go to number 5, which is effective school boards are data savvy. They embrace. We just went over this too. Do you want to take a pass on this one then? Okay. Number 6, effective school boards align and sustain resources such as professional development to meet district goals. Yep.
Yeah.
Anything else to add after doing the reading?
Here's what I would add, which is from the reading. Boards not only took an active interest in professional development, but also provided the infrastructure for such programming to succeed, which is kind of what you mentioned earlier. And I think that is something that we could, make it schools that have a little more understanding in, because I think it's happening, but not necessarily with the board's involvement without overstepping our role in that. That's how we enter into that conversation.
Thank you.
I just want to add that this almost assumes we have enough money to do our jobs well, and I just want to put out there that maybe we don't. And so, we're in this struggle of where we put our resources, and so like there's a lot of things we should do, but then it's like, is that going to be the best thing if it's limited? So I feel like that's kind of a do your best one, but I think it's a little bit tough to do it well.
So the they you're using there is the district, not the board, because we don't have any money, right? We're not paid. You said we don't have the money to do, I want to make sure you're talking about the district doesn't have the money to do the stuff that ideally the board would like them to do, not that the board is not making the connection between aligning and sustaining resources.
Well, it's hard to sustain resources if the district doesn't have them.
Anyone else? Number 6. Moving to number 7. So effective school boards lead as a united team with the superintendent, each from their respective roles with strong collaboration and mutual trust.
So in this one, I just want to make sure we call out that united doesn't mean unified, right? We can disagree, have a healthy disagreement, but still be a united board.
And I think the 4 bullets on the reading kind of help qualify what this one means. On page 11.
And I hope that this is one of those things that we are constantly working toward. I mean, this is, all relationships take sustaining and take work all the time to be healthy. And the relationship between the board and the superintendent is one of the most important ones that we have. And so, like, this is one of those active ones. Like, well, they're all active, but like this takes focus all the time. And so, and so this is one of the most important ones that we can do. And so my hope is that we're always, I feel like we're in a good place, but like that's just me. I would also look to you.
I think this is a standard where I get to weigh in a little bit too. And I have from afar serving as a principal that was at every board meeting and a cabinet member in board meetings. I've seen sometimes where the relationship between the superintendent and a board gets bumpy, and then I've seen sometimes it gets sideways, and there having to be a lot of repair work done to maintain a strong relationship. And we know that when the superintendent and the board have a strong relationship, that has a ripple effect into the organization for so many reasons. And I really feel that a lot here. Like, one thing that I knew going into this work was how important it was to have a strong board. And so when I was looking, into the TTSD, I was watching our board meetings, I was asking questions, and I just feel like, and I'm not just blowing smoke, I think this is I couldn't imagine a better superintendent board relationship to have right now.
I really appreciate that. And I think, there's always going to be disagreements, especially with like limited resources and everyone's wanting to do the best job. And there's such high stakes with the education of our whole community's children, right? So it's not like a thing to take lightly or just let go by the wayside. Like, we have to talk these things through and do the best we can and try and do justice to like where we come from and what we're thinking about to really deliver. But I think it's good to to be able to work collaboratively together. And we have a lot of challenges right now. Should be an interesting next year or so, and I think it's really good to be able to talk through our challenges together.
One thing that I had some wonderings on. Well, let me preface this by saying I think that the more that the superintendent and the board get to work side by side, where the board can continue to work in a board capacity, and the superintendent can work in an administrative capacity, but be in the same space, the better. And a really good example of that was during collective bargaining. And at first I was like, oh, this feels kind of weird that we got 2 board members on in this process so early. But I think it really benefited the superintendency and board relationship and community relations, because we had board members who were able to understand the needs of teachers firsthand during the license bargaining unit or license bargaining session. They were able to understand the needs, the intricacies, where there was pain points and points of tension, and also I think just putting in those long hours and being in those conversations helped build mutual respect across both the association and the administrative district leadership staff. And being in the room together at 1 a.m, I think it helps with growing our relationship as well. I was hoping for you to be able to pop some bubbly that night, but it didn't happen.
I had the sparkling cider in my car.
All right, anything
All that.
Anything else on number 7? Okay, we're moving on to number 8, so we're making good time now. Effective school boards take part in team development and training, sometimes with their superintendents, to build shared knowledge. This kind of goes back to your goal 1 for your what we talked about earlier today. Anything to add on this one?
I will just say one thing, and whoa. This is where this article is just a little bit dated. It says sometimes with their superintendents, and research shows us that when the board regularly does this with their superintendents, that is really critical because of that collaborative team. So I will just note that it shouldn't say sometimes. It should just say with the superintendent. So researcher in me has to point that out.
And also, I think all of us did the training that is now required by Oregon state law on being a board member that you have to do. It's only once a term now, but it at least is part of this multiple hours of training that board members should have. So we're not quite up to what is Kentucky requires 12 hours a year, but.
And I would say that, what I wrote is that we do a really great job. We have work sessions, those social gatherings, community listening opportunities, all these things where we can 1-off, 2-off, kind of be in community in other places besides board meetings. And I would like to spend time maybe over the summer sort of formalizing that method or schedule for ongoing PD, because I think that would be I think that would see good dividends.
The other thing I have to mention here, I really appreciate the work sessions we have, and we often have really strong presentations so that everyone can form kind of a shared understanding. But I would appreciate just like a little more opportunity for just a little bit more messiness, and dialogue of like just more active discussion in those, because I think sometimes when there's not enough balance between kind of the presentation side and the more discussion, it just feels like a really passive receiver of information, and then it feels kind of like it's like we need to be informed, but then we need to engage with the material a little bit. So I feel like that would be a little more engaging and a better way to kind of work through. I think when we're meeting with public meeting law, right, the whole point, even though it can be painful and messy, is to work through the issues as a group. And so just the opportunity to work through those a little more, even though it might be a little bit messier, rather than just have a presentation and vote, would be kind of a nice, just a little more of that from my perspective.
Thank you. And that's what we try to do in the work session. But no, it's duly noted. Thank you very much. All All right, so that brings us to the, kind of bring us back to the goal sheet and the essential questions on there. We don't need to tackle all of these. The one thing, the two that I think are important for you to give any input on is there anything that you want to modify to your goals or anything that you really want to focus on at the end of the year? And also, what kind of training do you need, whether that's individualized training, meaning having maybe a senior mentor or a peer in a different district, board member working with you, or doing some work at OSBA, just what are the needs of this board to get to the next level, whatever that might be. Any modifications to your goals or things that you want to focus on? Do you all feel pretty good at where they are right now? Seeing some head nods. See 4 head nods. 5 head nods.
We'd always like to have more time in buildings, board members in buildings, and over the years that's ebbed and flowed. And it really depends on who we've got on the board at that time. And when we've got people who have full-time jobs 45 minutes away, that's kind of hard for them to be in the building during the day. So I think we do all we can. And it's just, if it seems like this year is maybe lighter or this 2 years is maybe lighter than it was 4 years ago, well, that's because of the people who got elected to the position, and there's no indignity in that.
So more opportunities for getting in buildings, and that's really that's something I try to extend to folks. I meet you all at different cadences. Some I meet monthly, some I feel like I meet more than that.
Why is he looking at me?
These two are here. So to that end, yeah, but if I would love to create opportunities for you all to have more time in buildings, whether it's a fixed volunteer thing, I know that some of you do, or whether that's hey, I just want to go to an event or see a classroom, or I hear that cell phones are crazy during passing time, or they're not and they've really improved. Would love to have you come on in and see what's happening in schools, because there's a lot of special things happening. Any trainings that you all are interested in? No.
So
I can imagine.
This is actually something I think that would be a useful question to ask of staff, ask of the community, ask of our administrators.
Right.
What do you feel like the board is missing on? And that might be a very useful question to ask.
Yeah, and then what I can do too is in our one-on-one meetings, if you've had time to reflect on this and you think like, oh, you know what, I'd really like to go see another school board meeting or get connected with, then you might be thankful for what we have here. Or if you might want to get connected with another school board member who's grappling with the same things. I know that some of you all are connected with a cohort of school board members in Washington County. So whatever it might be, just let me know if there's any kind of board development that you would like to do, and I'll make sure that we do everything to make it happen.
Are there any conferences in Hawaii?
You do not want to be in the newspaper for that one. That happened in our hometown a long time ago.
That one's actually, the going to see other board meetings is actually a really easy one, because now every school board records them. They're on YouTube.
Yeah.
So it's actually when you're really bored on a rainy Sunday afternoon to go and watch a board meeting from wherever, it's entirely possible. And yeah, it will make you feel better about how we're doing it here.
So then I'll just close this segment by saying I think there's a lot to celebrate here. I think that balance between, and I don't need to unpack it all because I think we've lightly done it, but there's a lot to celebrate in terms of your involvement, your commitment, your roles. And then I think what you'll see is like there's a lot of respect for you all in the public, even though it's not on a formal survey yet. So, but we'll work on getting that done. So thank you for all you do.
We want to take like a 5-minute
Transitional,
recess.
bio, recess,
Bio
sunlight.
recess. Yes, please. All right, we will recess for until 2:52. 5 minutes.
Somebody's got to stay in there and recess though. Mine or there's something wrong with it?
Recess is over. Scoop. I'm not late.
I don't know if I can cut off. I don't know if I can cut off the chair. I think I would be ruled out of order if I tried to do that. Good
Just see what
afternoon.
happens.
Oops. Cut off the
All
chair
right,
again.
we are back in session for our mid-year board retreat. And next on the agenda, we have sort of our part 2, which is all things bond and budget with our interim communications director, Alex.
Thank you. So before I start my presentation with my words, I'd like to ask you to look at a couple of videos we put together. I know that a couple of you have seen them already, and Chair Irvin is already holding her head. She did the first time she saw it, but she did great. And without further ado, why don't we take a look at the new bond video, which just got completed this week.
In TTSD, we're grateful for community support. It makes a huge difference to our students. Our community last passed the bond in 2016. Since that time, our facilities have aged and the demands of modern learning have changed. This May, Tigard-Tualatin School District will be asking voters to approve a bond that would allow the district to repair our oldest facilities and make targeted investments to support the needs of modern learning. This bond would modernize our oldest schools, increasing student and staff safety and providing students with warm, safe, and dry classrooms.
We're here at Tualatin Middle School, one of the bond projects local voters approved in 2016. Tualatin is now a shining example of a modern learning environment.
Passing the bond and allowing us to rebuild Tualatin has had a significant impact on our students' learning. And that is evidenced in their performance, how they feel about the space, how they show up each day. And that wouldn't be available to us without the support of taxpayers to pass the bond.
In the nearly 9 years since our community last passed a bond, time has taken its toll. Across the district, we have aging and inefficient school buildings that are in need of updating and replacement. The TTSD School Board is asking our community to approve the $421.3 million bond measure on May 20th, 2025.
I've worked in this building since 2008, and it has not gotten better with time. We're patching things together as best we can.
This building is 35 years old, and the lighting is at the end of its life right now. And there is no replacement because the technology is so old, so we'll need an upgrade. And we can't do that with the money we have right now.
The school itself feels old, it feels dirty. I think that really plays a part in the morale of the students and the staff.
If passed, the proposed bond would repair, prepare, and secure our schools.
Our district also qualifies for a matching grant from the state of Oregon. If the bond passes, TTSD will receive an additional $8.28 million to help pay for bond projects. 100% of the bonds will be used locally for Tigard-Tualatin schools. This measure will be on the May 2025 ballot.
Our schools are learning spaces for more than 11,000 students.
But they're also gathering and recreational spaces for our entire Tigard-Tualatin community, and an investment that requires upkeep over time. Please be sure to vote in the May election.
We hired a contractor, somebody that used to work with Blue Shock, who I worked with a lot. It's not them, but it's somebody who worked, 2 people who worked with them in the past. But thank you. I thought they did beautiful work and appreciate what they did.
You guys didn't take pictures of Durham when it was all muddy and like everybody was getting stuck.
So thanks for watching that. The next one's just 30 seconds. I just want to give you another idea of where we'll be in the social media space, and then I'll have some short remarks to share with you. Could you show the next one, please, Gustavo? Should not be this.
I've worked in this building since 2008, And it has not gotten better with time. We're patching things together as best we can. If this bond doesn't pass, we know that we have more decades to spend in this aging building.
So that just gives you an idea of the kind of quick bites that we'll take via social media. Just wanted to, and we have 6 different ones of those. So the first one is one that we'll be using at a lot of presentations. I think it really sets a foundation for where we are. It's accessible. I think that people can see the sweet spot we're trying to hit was we definitely have challenges here in TTSD, but we have a solution, right? And so, and the story that we want to tell, or there's many parts of the story, is that this community has really supported its schools. That's one of the striking things that's hit home for me in the 5 months I've been working here at TTSD, is just how invested the community is in schools. It's something that you all are aware of, that you live, and certainly worth talking about. In 2016, we as a community, TTSD voters invested $291 million. That money was well spent, on time. Our ask now is, as you know, is $421 million. As it turns out, if you just look at COLA, 291 from 2016 is in the range of $380 million today. So in real dollars, what we're asking for today is just a little bit more than what this district asked for in 2016 as far as accounting for inflation. We've been ramping up since your board passed this on December 9th. January and February, we're just putting together some printed materials that you're seeing here. It takes a lot of time, like this video, which lasts 3 minutes, takes a long time to pull together in terms of writing script, bringing the people together, doing the editing. And we're at the point now, particularly in March and April is really crunch time for being out in the community. Dr. Udo is really going to be one of our main ambassadors in speaking with the community. I and Darren Bernard and Kevin Montague have already been doing presentations to our PSOs. We've done 8 in the last couple of weeks. We started this week to present directly to staffs at their staff meetings. It was a real pleasure. We were at Bridgeport earlier this week, and if you're ever feeling like it's a gloomy, rainy day and you want to pick up, go to Bridgeport, meet the staff there. They're tremendous. They're just so sunny bright. They're cheering during the video. They're laughing, and it was amazing. If you look at, if you take a minute and open the packet that I've left with you during the break, I just want to walk you through a few things there. On the right side of your packet, that first handout is 8 pages long, and that's really for individuals like yourselves who can act as bond ambassadors. And this kind of gives you step-by-step talking points around the bond. As you've heard me say before, and as I present to our employees, as an employee myself, for example, the district, and this it would include Dr. Udo, during our workday, the information that we can share and do share with people involves fair and impartial information under ORS. Outside of my workday, I can have the opportunity to act as an advocate and move into that advocacy space. You all, as elected officials, have the opportunity, should you wish, to advocate for the bond any time of day, night or day. So this is an opportunity that you have. So you're not restricted by the ORS around political campaigns. So having said that, that first handout on the right side is a number of pages that walk you through some talking points. The ones you've seen on this video, and they're amplified here, some very basic, repair, prepare, and secure. And really what that's all about in terms of repair is we've got aging buildings. In the case of Fowler's turning 51 years old this year. The 4 elementaries are an average of 43 years old. Across the district, we've got all kinds of aging pipes. For example, Byram is is an example of a place where there's lead in the pipes. They've had issues there for years. Deer Creek has significant safety issues around the doors, does not have classroom doors. And as we look around, we've got aging roofs, flooring. HVAC is a significant issue in terms of ventilation and common spaces. So there's a lot to talk about. And again, to be effective, we don't make it all gloom and doom. We just talk about, and there's a solution. This is what it involves. It's an investment in our community. I think it's something that will resonate with our community. Within that packet, after that longer guide that's for you all, there are some shorter talking points that I'd welcome you sharing with others. It's a single-page handout. And then behind that, there's a handout that's in Spanish that you'll see. Again, this is on the right side. It's the last thing that you'll see. We just got this yesterday. So this is a Spanish version of the very main handout that we have that I want to call out. Gustavo did some great work. That main photo you see right there, a very compelling photograph, is one that he took. And I'm really proud to the work that he's done on this to share with our constituents. On the left side of that folder that you have is the same main handout in English. And this is really one of the just really powerful, compact messages that we have for people. What is the bond about? It starts out with 5 things to know about the bond and digestible pieces. Again, it hits on that repair, secure, prepare messaging that we heard from our polling. It resonates with our constituents. It alludes to the state matching grant, which I think you've all heard about a number of times. If this bond passes, the state's already committed to $8.28 million that comes to us, and that's the equivalent of free bonus money if we're able to pass this bond. Then there's, on the flip side of this, again, more information, including, the cost, which, as we know, are a new property tax of 99 cents per thousand in assessed value. After that handout, I need to take a look. Yes. So thank you, Chair Irvin. So this is an older handout that I'm not in love with and is being revised. But the reason I put it in there is on the back side of it, which Chair Irvin's now looking at. If you want to flip the other side, there is a school by school site of what would happen here. So we're revising this handout because I want the flip side of it to be in a better spot. But in the meantime, this is the best current handout we have that includes site by site a list of things that are planned in the bond. And then I think there's might be one more thing back there. No, I correct myself. So that's what's there. We put it together for you because we're hopeful that in your travels you will share this and just let people know what the opportunity is out there for them. I'm excited about it. I think this is an amazing generational opportunity. When we look at Fowler being built 51 years ago, we can imagine that if a new Fowler is built in 2 or 3 years, that's going to outlast all of us. So again, as the main one is this one pager, and a million of them wouldn't fit in. I've left at the end of the table there more of these if you would like to take them, and a few more of the very same ones in Spanish. Please take as many as you'd like. And should you run out, if you text me or email me, I'm glad to get you more. And with that, I'm glad to answer any questions that you have.
I don't have a question, but I did want to point out that the bond rate, the 99 cents per thousand, is on the assessed rate and not on the market value of the house. I know we had questions from community members saying, how come if it's really 99 cents per thousand, how come isn't that it's 675,000?
How come that would be $25 per month or $300?
Right,
yes,
and because the houses are average value
yes
of 675,000.
Thank you for the clarification. It's on assessed value, and the median assessed value within our district is just a little over $300,000 for a home. So definitely there's a distinction on assessed versus the real market value.
Anything else? Excellent.
When do you anticipate having the revised this fall?
Within about the next week, and I'll be glad to share that with you when that is revised. I just wanted to make sure you had it because we do get questions from people. How will this affect my school? I wanted to have that in hand, but I'll be sure to get that in your hands as soon as we have it. It should be very soon.
Perfect. Yeah, this detailed stuff, and this is also proposed. Obviously, if estimated costs come in very high, we might have to trim this down a little bit, but hopefully we'll have enough to do everything.
Yes, thank you again for that clarification. That's really our vision of what would happen, but the Bond Oversight Committee would have to approve, and there's going to be some fluidity there, but this is what we foresee happening.
Alex, I know you kind of mentioned a little bit that we're getting into the season where, of course, I'm going to play a more prominent role in sharing information related to the bond to the public. What can the board expect in terms of their role in doing that?
Thank you for asking. We do have opportunities and would love to have you join Dr. Udo at various meetings. So I'll reach out to you probably individually. I think probably to some degree that the burden might fall more heavily on the board chair, bless you, for those opportunities. But yeah, we'd love to have you come into those spaces as well and support us. Certainly when you are out in the community, any chance you have, every touch I think is going to count. Our polling indicates that we can get there, provided that we share the message effectively. So I'll thank you for the reminder. Reach out to you individually and see if you can support us in our public engagement at community meetings.
And if our board's interested in doing advocacy work, do they reach out to you or Jeremy, right? Or
me. Yeah, reach out to me.
Okay.
And separately, advocacy work is being done by the Bond PAC and Chair Urban and a number of others are involved in that. I meet with them every week, and so that there are opportunities there as well. But in that instance, the PAC would reach out directly. But yes, any question you have, anything that you need help on, any doubts you have, please text me, call me, email me. That's what I'm here for.
Thank you.
Appreciate
it.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any questions about?
Just want to say thanks for all the materials. Really, really well done.
And that video is outstanding, by the way. For as much as, I'm not going to lie, as much as I grumbled about having to do a video, he deserves a raise because I grumbled about it. I think I might have kicked him out of the filming session when he was facing next to me. And so it came out I was like, there's no way this is going to be a good video. I got 10 minutes. Alex won't quit pacing and telling me what to say. And then it came out beautifully. So thank you very much. Yes.
I have further to add at a different session. Yes, just as he described, but more.
Thank you so much. Okay, where are we at on the agenda?
I do feel like I need a button that says "Ask me about the bond," so I can just carry stuff around and people can ask me. It'd be nice. Not a sandwich board.
A sandwich board would
Maybe.
be great.
Hey, but if you want one of those,
Ask me about the ball.
Bring those back into style.
I will only use a button. Maybe a ribbon. There will be no shirt. There will be no sandwich board.
That's great. We'll get something for you. The PAC might get something for you, rather. Okay, so next is I want to come back to a conversation related to committee work. So when we met in August, something that came up was this idea around having a balance of committee work so that the board is present, informed, and able to lead in a balanced way. And part of that way is through committee work, but also not inundating you with so much committee work that it becomes an undue ask or an overwhelming ask of board members. So to that end, what I just wanted to do is create some space for you all to freely discuss, like how is committee work going, right? So you have a handout in your packet that looks like this, and just really want to just have a free-flowing conversation about how committee work's going.
So I'm good with it the way it is. I I am on a lot of the committees, and that's how I like it. And I feel very strongly that it's each board member according to their interests and according to their abilities. And I don't expect anybody to sit on a committee just for the sake of, I've got to sit on a committee. It's got to be a committee you're interested in and that you have the time for it so that you can do the work well. And there's no shame or dishonor in saying, I don't have the time for that one.
I'm laughing because I'm on curriculum and I did not get any of the emails about it, but I'm also on doing the bond pack, so I'm a little bit like not. I love actually curriculum committee, but now I'm like, oh, I was on that, and I know it's meeting, but I never got the invites. But it's okay because I'll hop on later, or
each according to their
on,
ability.
Add me on if there's more to do, and if not, or you need to be tagged out and tag me in. That's fine too. The bond will be 2 more months and then we're done.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and we all, we all talk about this. It's hard to be a working person and make a lot of space during the day. For the curriculum committee, it was an ask of 4 full days, right? And it was take 4 full vacation days, which I could not do. I just simply could not do it. And so I was at the last one. I will be at the next one. I missed the first 2, plus they were scheduled during, very shortly after I got invites. Policy committee is easier for me because it's smaller and we all try and schedule when we can. It's harder for me just as a person to be on committees that here's the schedule, which are, big committees that have to schedule, which cannot schedule around a person, because there is a high likelihood I will not be able to make it, or at least all of it. And so that's, then I feel incredibly guilty, but that is my reality, is that I just can't always do it. So then I'm I feel bad because I can't always participate, but that's the reality for me of being on committees that that schedule independently and are big and have that. So so that that is my conundrum as an individual.
Along those lines, just to get some context, it would be helpful to go through the does this have set meeting dates, or are they flexible? How many, what is the logistics of each one? Were you just thinking that?
That's what I wrote down.
Yeah,
so,
because I know some of these, but others I don't. So, because I can't sign up for it if I don't. I might not be able to go.
Sorry, what I think we can do, Director Weston, is we can look. So there's 2 things that I'd encourage the board to consider. One is a purely structural, which is some of these could fall under the purview of a superintendent, like a superintendent's committee, where board can attend, and then there's just less rigid restrictions when it comes to public meeting laws. But importantly, it might just feel like it's more of a function of something the superintendent would do, and the board would be there, and there's less pressure for you all to attend. So that's something to look at, and then I would simply give the board recommendations from what might come out of a superintendent's committee. So that's one structure to look at. And then the other is the scheduling and the timing of when these committees meet. Some committees, it makes sense to meet monthly. Like a policy committee probably needs to meet continuously. Yeah, right. And then you have a curriculum committee, which might be able to meet quarterly, or when they're adopting, or there's a summertime review where it feels like people have more flexible schedules in general. So I would be happy to, I don't know if this is really for Chair Irvin to think about, but doing maybe a subcommittee to review what our committees look like, and then bring some recommendations later on in the public space.
Another thing, and this is, Jade and I talked about this a little bit when we first met together, is potentially using board book which is what a lot of boards use, OSBA uses. And one of the benefits of that, just as a program, is it has like a calendar. So we could really see a shared board book calendar where all these committee meetings meet, when they are, how often they are, board meet, like all of the things that we all would potentially attend or want to know when they're meeting. So we don't have to have a million invites on, right? Like I think all of us have multiple Google calendars. I have 4. And so it's complicated, and then we can't see where all of us are also really busy doing other things. And so that would be a potential benefit if we moved to, and then all of our, it just houses all of our recordings, all of our minutes, all the things. So because I do wish in some ways that we had, at least when it comes to committee work, that function to just see not the whole district calendar, but really the board, like cabinet calendar, or committee calendar. So I'm happy to kind of consider a subcommittee to both look at committees, a committee for committees, and then also, we can talk about if, you, Jade, the group would want to kind of look into sort of moving towards board book as a way to sort of organize our collective space.
So sorry, go ahead.
That might be helpful, but like all I need, it's almost just a decision-making tool of like policy committee. I know, like I've served on that one before. It meets, or, committee X meets twice a month at noon on these days, right? Because if I go sign up for something and I don't know when it meets, then maybe I won't be able to go. So it's just like literally, when does it meet? How often? Like that's all we need. I mean, that's all I need. Other people might need to see everyone's schedule, or this committee meets, like I know curriculum committee, you can like sign up for a particular adoption area, and it's sometimes in a spurt, right? So, so that's how that one works. Or others tend to check everyone's schedule and then try and find a time that works for everyone. Other ones are just set, and that's the time. And if you are generally unavailable at that time, then you probably shouldn't sign up for it. So just that information with each committee, so when we look at it, we'll know.
And over the years, there's been a sliding of our committees, because like curriculum was never a committee. It was a district function that a board member or two would be invited to come sit on if they had the time. But when it started out, it was not the board members expected to go to every single one of the 8-hour committee curriculum meetings. But then we had one board member who really got into that stuff, and so would go to every single one. And then there became this expectation that the board members who had been assigned to that role, it's not really a committee of the board. It's certainly not a committee of the board, right? It's a district committee that the board member was invited to sit on. But like when I first started on that committee in that role, it was, I would go to those 8-hour meetings for like an hour to sit in on one of the pieces of it. And the idea was so that somebody on the board was familiar with what the committee work was doing, and that the process was moving along, and that there was fidelity to the various things that the board had said is important when we're looking at curriculum. And I think over the years, we had made those into these very static committees that, well, we have to have 2 board members who are going to go to every single minute of every single, and that's not, I think, functional, because it's not. And so maybe this committee review, that's one of the things we need to take into consideration. I had to laugh when you said we should adopt board book, because we actually used to use board book. And for our board agendas. And it worked pretty well. And I'm hoping that maybe board book has developed over the years, because what we found is when we stopped using board book, we lost all of the information about all of our board meetings. It went away when we stopped using the software. And so I'd be a little bit nervous about, have they fixed that problem with it? That you can still retrieve the data if you're no longer using their software. I would assume they have, but I would definitely want to look into that before we committed to it.
Yeah, I feel like where we're at right now is, do you want to go to lunch? What day? I don't know. Well, then I don't know if I'm free. Like, so. It's just, yeah.
Okay, anything else on committees in general that we haven't broached that we'd like to? Sounds like there's a couple of action items, not technical action items, but moving forward, it sounds like something that we can do is, as the year ends, review times that the committees would meet, perhaps re-upping or adopting the use of the board book. And then also, I would recommend to the board, as we look at these 7 or 8 committees, determine where the through line is to board work, and then where the through line is to district work that the board is involved in. And so that would be my recommendation to the board. And to do that at the conclusion of the school year. So probably it would be an agenda item for our next cabinet retreat. And then one thing that wasn't on here, but I always want to create space for, is the composition of the board. Yep, it's not on there. Composition of the board. So right now we have a 5-member board. Districts of this size routinely have a 7-member board. There are a lot of benefits to having a 5-member board, and there's a lot of benefits to having a 7-member board. So I just want to create or hold space for you all to revisit this item as it's come up before since I've been here.
I was going to say, I definitely broached this with Kristen. And yeah, and just kind of start thinking about it. It's a very, I know there have been times in the past where this has been brought up, and there's different mechanisms in which to add seats to a board, and they're very straightforward, easy ones, and that would be the path forward we would take probably on our next, I would think in our next like election, our board cycle in 2 years, theoretically. And so this is just something, again, planting the seed to just like, here's the sort of first thought around it. If there's questions, thoughts either way, and then certainly something that we can talk about at many later dates, but just kind of wanted to, I know I talked to one person about it, but in a public meeting space, bring it to kind of to everyone for first thoughts at least, or just discussion.
Are we doing that now? Are we doing first thoughts?
You want first thoughts?
Well, I mean, I just wondered if that's what we were doing.
Tell us how you feel.
Well, okay. I think it would be good as an exercise for us to do sort of like a thoughtful pros and cons, right? I mean, and I think that's probably what we would do. In my experience, yes, a board of even boards of teeny size have 7-member boards. There's no real rhyme or reason to the 5 and 7. But given that, I mean, this conversation I think ties really well to what we were just discussing. Given the level of involvement that this board has or is expected to have in the kind of things the district does, like the committees and being involved and showing up and all of that, like in my experience, this board is pretty involved, and that is the culture of the expectations of this board. It would be good to spread out that work, I think, a little bit for a 7-member board. Now, that does not mean there's an invitation to add more to the board's plate, which I think is sometimes the temptation. But like if we were going to keep the number of committees or something, it would be maybe good to spread that out. I also just wonder if there is an opportunity to be, for community involvement, again, staying in the board's lane. But if there were 7 people on the board, if there's more opportunity to, be involved with community events or be involved with the things that the district throws, not just out there in the community, but but more opportunities for those of us who are able to go to things that the district has. and show up and represent the board. And then there are negative aspects to that too. It's, the more people you have on a board, the more unwieldy it can become. The superintendent has to answer to more people. I mean, there are pros and cons. I think it would be really good for us to collaborate with our superintendent and weigh those options.
One thing this makes me think of is, I think it was a year or two ago, the legislature passed a thing about school board members being compensated. And I'm not sure where that's at, but I know that was brought up as a way to make it so more diverse community members could show up with their time. If that ever happened, then adding 2 members would have an impact from that perspective.
Well, have we passed the bill to fix it? No, yeah, we can't do that. Yeah, the OGEC said, no, it conflicts with another law.
It passed and then it was.
Yeah, it passed, but then OGEC said, no, you can't do that.
Prior to that, I think we as a board, just for historical, whatever perspective, we as a board at that time sort of said, even if it passes, when we are in a deficit budget situation, there might be other ways that we could make sure that people that wanted to serve could serve, but utilizing funding would not feel right, at least in this particular time. But then it kind of became a moot point because it couldn't happen.
I think there was an idea too, and I don't know if this is currently.
There
is there a bill?
There is currently a bill.
Okay, there's a fix. There's a bill to fix that so that it doesn't conflict with current ethics laws, but I don't know if that'll go anywhere. I don't know if that's a priority.
So we'll do a second thought on this in the summertime board retreat. Thank you. Okay, so we're again making up for some lost time, or we were behind schedule. We're getting closer to being on schedule rather. The next part of our update or of our agenda is around legislative updates and then budget updates. So. Director Zerschmied and Chair Irvin, if you have any updates to provide, and then I'll just briefly touch on some federal updates. I try to keep you updated on that weekly, so there's not a lot to add, but want to create space for conversation.
So it just so happened that immediately prior to this meeting, there was the weekly legislative policy update meeting for the LPC. So I do have the latest and greatest there. So I'll just give you the high points though, because there were we were a little bit rushed. We're at that point in the session where so much is happening. Mostly bills are being heard, public input is being given. There haven't been many that have had, I don't think there have been any that have had any decisions made on them yet. The big news though was the March revenue forecast, which came out on Wednesday. It shows an extra 350 million more than what the November, oh God, that's loud. What the November forecast showed. The governor's budget was built on that previous one, and so that's some good news because 350 million more would certainly be lovely. However, the likelihood is that Ways and Means Committee, which takes the next stab at the budget, they often like to hold more back in reserves. So it's unclear, obviously, what it means for education. There's going to be housing and transportation. They have needs, but an extra 350 million would sure go a long way to fixing some of our sped problems in particular. The other big component of that uncertainty, of course, is not knowing what the federal budget will be doing. Medicaid cuts could really devastate the Oregon budget. And so there's still too much up in the air to know, but overall, probably it's positive. Ways and Means will be creating their budget in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully by the middle of March, we should have at least their first stab at what our budget might be. We've got a few problems with the cat tax, which is the one that fills the various student success buckets. Because part of the cat tax deal was to reduce income taxes, there's a bit of a gap, and that gap is getting bigger. Some of the cat tax was used to sort of backfill the students, the school, student success fund. So there's probably going to be about $70 million less going into the student success buckets for the next year. There are currently 3 CAT bills, and I believe that most of them have to do with like exempting pharmacies from the CAT tax, whether they're in rural areas. Anyways, OSBA's stance on it is these are all fine bills, but we need to make sure that they're revenue neutral for schools. So that seems reasonable to me. We then talked about the AIR report, the AIR, which is linked to the QEM, and the overall resounding banging of the drums out of that is that the SPED funding for the state of Oregon is woefully inadequate. It is in fact one of the worst in the country. Our 11% cap on special ed is the lowest in the United States. We've been hearing a lot from legislators saying, well, we've given you huge increases over the last 5 years, but, and this is the most money we've ever given you, right? That's what we've been hearing over and over again. But what that doesn't take into consideration is the fact that pretty much all of those increases, if we look at it against inflation, fundamentally we're funded at the same level we were 5 years ago, because everything's been eaten up by inflation. There was also some trashing of the Edunomics session that came out that was talking about how awful Oregon is. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that a lot of the things that Edunomics seminar took as for their statistics was sort of cherry picked and not actually accurate. For bill updates, the accountability conversation is moving in a good direction, but there is some concern that legislators aren't really hearing what we're saying. And that is fundamentally, we can't meet accountability standards without additional funds to do that work. So if you wanted to have something to talk to legislators about, Director Weston, I think that could be a really useful point to make. And it's hardly radical, right? It's like, if you can ask us to do more, give us the money to do it. Let's see, there are currently 2 concurrent bills on accountability. One's in the House, one's in the Senate. So where they're going to meet in the middle will be interesting to see. There was a wonderful point that somebody made at one point in the meeting about the funding situation in Oregon and the fact of what this state is doing and what this state is doing, and how Oregon is actually getting just as much money as other states, which of course isn't true. One of the reasons why those state-to-state comparisons are inaccurate, and I never knew this before, is that Oregon includes all of its PERS spending in its total education budget. Other states don't include their retirement system in that number. And so it looks like they're doing more for education with so much less money. But if we took the PERS out of our equation, you would see just how radically underfunded Oregon schools are. So I think that might be an important point to be able to bring up to people. Let's see. HB 3435 is school meals for all. There are currently 20 districts in the state of Oregon that do not offer school lunch and breakfast for all. So that bill would try to bridge that gap. There are several bills on chronic absenteeism that are being consolidated into one bill, and that's House Bill 3199. As our OSBA rep described it. It's lots of studies and very unsexy stuff. But it's a lot of data and a lot of figuring out where the problems are, and then how can we get the funding for early warning systems and responses to those chronic absenteeism problems. Senate Bill 916, my personal favorite. A couple of interesting things I learned about this one as well.
So this one is providing unemployment when strikes.
Yeah, so there's been the first round of amendments to this bill. The waiting period has been extended from 1 week to 2 weeks, so that gives a little bit more flexibility, a little less cost to districts. What's interesting is that that would still be the most generous plan offered in the entire country. The only 2 states that come close to having a 14-day or 2-week waiting period is New York and New Jersey, but public workers cannot strike in New York and New Jersey because it applies to other industries. So it's kind of interesting that we're the only state that would be that liberal with the policy, and it also applies to public workers. So they're doing some work to clarify the administrative rules on how to implement it, the timeline and stuff like that. There will be another opportunity for public comment on Tuesday, and it is expected to move out of committee next Thursday. And at this point, it looks like it will move out of committee. And so that will be something that we will definitely need to lobby on, because the implications to our district are significant. I believe the number is, if our teachers were allowed to get unemployment insurance when they were, for a week when they were on strike, the cost to our district would be something in the ballpark of $650,000 a week.
In Forest Grove, they estimated it to be $350,000 a day to cover unemployment.
And I asked our CFO about that, because I think it's
there's the insurance coverage piece too that they.
Right, but that's what.
So some districts pay into insurance to cover that, and some don't. So that would, yeah.
But we're also, as I understand it, self-funded, aren't we? Or are we self-funded as Forest Grove is, or?
We're billed in arrears based off of actual claims, so we don't pay into like a mod factor or anything like that.
It would be a lot of money.
It would be a lot of
no
money.
matter what.
And it would, the other part of it that, and I've tried to explain this to one of our legislators, is it would come at a point in the year that would be very difficult to recover from. So if we had a strike, God forbid, in say December or January, we would have already passed our budget for the year. We would then be looking for, how do we come up with $500,000 or $1 million, whatever it might be, mid-year. And there's no good way to do that, especially when we have no reserves left. It's a double whammy, yeah. So this is a bill that we're watching very closely, and anybody who wants to write to their legislator about it, I encourage you to.
For context, this year, when we settled, fortunately without threat of strike, it still cost us mid-year reductions. Mm-hmm. And where we settled, if there was a strike, we'd have to probably have settled it more, and it would have cost a lot more, and it would have been very challenging for our district to make those in-year reductions without significantly compromising student programming, meaning cutting days, cutting programs mid-year. So,
and it leaves us as board members in a really frustrating position, right? Because I firmly believe that our teachers and our staff should be members of a union and have the right to strike. But I also don't think they have the right to destroy our financial system in the process. It's a very, very.
So we'll be keeping our eye out on that one and see how it plays out. What else do we have?
I've got 3 quick more to go. House Bill 3012 is the one that would enable students to vote for school board members. That one, it turns out, would have a significant extra cost because we would have to mail out separate ballots to those 16 to 18-year-olds. And there's also a little bit of concern because it seems to be against the Oregon Constitution. So we're not quite sure how that one's going to go. Then there's House Bill 3357. This is OSEA's Work Shouldn't Hurt bill, which would have a massive financial impact. This bill asks that the district must report and track every injury to staff by a student or at work. And so the amount of paperwork it would create and the amount of investigations that it would require, not necessarily bad work, but again, not funded. So it's a matter of if you want us to do the work, you have to give us the money to do the work. And then finally, another bill that's just in the hopper is House Bill 3562, which is regarding class size, and that would require class size to be part of mandatory negotiations. And that's what we got from today's.
Thank you. And Chair Irvin, do you have anything to add?
No, well, one thing really quickly, which is Jill made mention to the AIR, which is the American Institute for Research report on education, and that is something, it's a 3-hour recording, which I have, and I'm happy to, on your weekend time or whenever, send that out if you want to look at that. It's broken into 6 different pieces, I believe, and there are a couple in particular that are really helpful to better understand sort of the QEM and all the things, so I can send that out to, I know that some legislative policy committee members had access to that, but I'll send it out to everybody if they wish.
Thank you. And if there's any
like that.
areas that you want to highlight or if you've seen it, that'd be great.
So thank you so much for the overview of the bills. I'm wondering about when is the time to be able to advocate about the actual budget? Like how much is going to QEM, because that's not a bill.
QEM is a law.
I know what QEM is, but like the state school fund, that part.
So this would be a good time to contact members you know on Ways and Means and tell them about funding for education.
Okay, so it's just whenever.
It's right now. No time like the present. Things are moving hot and heavy right now. So right now is when they need to hear. And when you go onto the OLIS, it'll show you when public comment is available. And if you can't actually make it down to sign up for public comment, then written comment is fabulous.
I'll talk to you offline.
Thank you. Okay, so the last part of legislative updates has to do with some federal updates. I sent you a document, sorry, it was some late reading to give you. It wasn't a lot, and it was something that was definitely skimmable, but I just thought it was a really poignant article. It was from the ASA. I got this it's from the Education Council, but via the AASA. Why am I trying to blank on it's the Superintendent's Association. AASA, thank you. It's one of those things. It's like sometimes you have a really basic word that you can't remember how to spell. To that end, it was a really good article that unpacks this onslaught of federal mandates that have just been, that we've been peppered with over the last 2 months, really a month and a half, but it feels like 2 months, and how to interpret many of these things. And the reason I thought it was important to speak about this here is because with every federal update that we have, normally the natural question, whether it's from a staff member or from community or from other colleagues, is, well, what are we going to do now? This thing just came out. Does that mean we have to implement this change? One example of a change is, hey, no more use of the term DEI or something to that extent, right? Does that mean we're not allowed to use equity in our language, and the answer to that is no. There's an appeal process that goes with some of these federal mandates, especially if they conflict with states' rights, right? And especially if they conflict with an area of our government which is governed by a state rather than the enumerated power isn't at the federal level. And so in the Dear Colleague letter, it says some of the things that came out, or sorry, in the analysis of the Dear Colleague letter, some of the things that came out that were written in there are just unconstitutional, right, or unlawful. And so we're not going to implement those things, but rather we're going to continue to use our current policy and then also be in frequent communication with ODE and the state for where we lie as a district on action that we need to take. Some of you may have seen, as in your weekly OSBA digest, that Eugene School District 4J signed on to a lawsuit which is disputing some of these federal mandates, especially around how they target our DEI and curriculum, which is inclusive curriculum and tells a whole story and a shared history. So so that's something that we are monitoring closely. I'm in communications with Superintendent Gill to understand what's going to come of that, and then what we can learn and apply to our school district. And then, as I stated in our school district, in our school board meeting a couple of weeks ago, we have been very clear in our affirmation of this being a district where we include others. And if you unpack the terms DEI, one is for diversity. That is something that we believe deeply in. We are better by having a more diverse workforce, student body, and way of thinking. And then the other area is around equity. We know there's a difference between equal and fair. We know that our country has a long-standing history of inequity, and it takes a concerted effort to unpack that and to correct for that so that all of our kids can realize whatever their dreams are. And so I'm saying this once again, that in terms of what are we going to do, there's action to be taken, certainly, to ensure that our students and staff are protected. And those are mechanisms that we've had built into the fabric of how we do things in this district because we have such a strong equity lens. And so fortunately, when people wonder what we're going to do, some of it is just kind of dusting off some of our protocols that we have in place. But other things that we're doing is just doubling down on what we've already done. So, so to that end, when it comes to some of these federal updates, we are going to continue to sit and wait to see what happens next, but that does not mean we're sitting on our laurels. We can't afford to do that. So no matter what, we still need to be prepared for whatever may come our way. And that's something that we're working really closely with other districts on to ensure that we're exchanging ideas when it comes to being prepared for the evaporation or the withdrawal of some federal monies. I was speaking with our CFO, who's going to give us an update in a minute, but if we were impacted by some of these federal funds, that would be anywhere between 5 to 10% of our budget. That would hurt. That would hurt a lot. Don't get me wrong. For context, that's 10% of our budget's like 19 million, right? And then 5% is about a little less than 10 million. But we also would have a plan to make things work, right? And we also know that just based on watching the news, our systems depend in red states and blue states depend so much on federal funding, and some of those things, some of the funding can't be interrupted at this time, legally can't be interrupted. So I don't think we're going to get to a worst case scenario, but if we did, we're on our way to being prepared, and we'll find a way to get through. But the preparation right now, or the move right now, is through intentional advocacy, right? And so that's what we're working on. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. Oops, sorry. I needed more wait time.
Sorry, I just had a few thoughts. I mean, obviously, diversity, kids are inherently diverse, like our community is diverse. You can't get rid of some of your students or pretend they're not there. And with inclusion, I think one thing I think people sometimes miss is like it's almost trying, I think some of these executives orders are almost trying to advocate for like the idea of color blindness, like just pretending everyone's the same. And one illustration of how ridiculous that can really be is I had this come up recently discussing with someone with a workplace accommodations around a disability. If you're to like pretend the disability doesn't exist, for example, if somebody's visually impaired, like you can't just pretend it's not there. You have to do something for the situation to function, for them to be able to participate. So it's just, it really falls flat, obviously. But I just wanted to break it down a little bit for people engaging with the conversation. And I'm wondering if we did lose funding, and which of course may not happen, but would it make sense to have an executive session to discuss any legal options on our part?
It definitely would. And so the things that we're looking at right now are around student nutrition, Title I, Title II, SPED, IDEA. There's a few more. I don't have them all written down, but those are the things that we're monitoring closely that would impact our district funding. And we can call executive session for certain areas related to budget. But correct me if I'm wrong. Not budget, bargaining.
Legal.
But bargaining.
But if there's a legal situation,
I don't think we can do an exec session for that. So.
I didn't hear any of you.
Sorry, that was a pop quiz that I'm glad I got to do a retake on.
Wait, but if there's a lawsuit, isn't that?
We would have to speak openly about it in public. That's fine.
If we're serving a lawsuit, we have to discuss it in public. If it's a lawsuit against us, we have the right to consult with our lawyers in private, in executive session.
Okay, well, I think it would make sense to join the lawsuit then.
Okay, well, thank you for, thank you for sharing. Okay, anything else on this? All right, we will, we're about a few minutes behind again, but it's okay. We're gonna end at 5 no matter what. So we are gonna bring our patient CFO, Jessica C., on to give us some budget updates. Director C. There you are. There's a lot of stuff going on. It was an ambitious agenda to start off with. We started a half hour late. And so while she gets ready, I'm just going to tee things up. She's going to get us up to date on our 25-27 financials, where we are with our processes, anything related to community budget workshops, and then also just some of the AROI work that we've been doing as a district leadership team.
Sorry, it was like, hi, am I the last stop before your weekend? Oh, okay.
No, we're going to talk about my evaluation.
Oh, fun. Okay. Well, hi everyone. I was just trying to avoid being like next slide. So Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for teeing us up. So Ethan already went over the points of what we're going to do an overview for. So first of which is our academic return on investment. I wanted to pull back a little bit and just provide a little bit of information on the academic return on investment approach. Our district is part of the Smarter School Spending Alliance, which is organized by the Government Financial Officers Association, and the Smarter School Spending Alliance really tries to use a strategic financial plan that works in alignment with a strategic plan to invest extra funds, uphold projects or programs when funds are tight, and because that process aligns with the length of the strategic plan. Often there's a regimented process within those 5 years where programs are evaluated and reported upon. And so typically after we complete our budget, we'll also report back on the investments made in the 24-25 school year. But we have been we've had changes in leadership and wanted to make the investment in revitalizing the AROI process. And so we've been working with district management group to learn about the AROI process and also run that process through 3 investments. And the hallmark of the academic return on investment triangle is this investment working for what students, and this is very specific. It helps us disaggregate data and run thoughtful analysis. And then the last question we also ask in layman's terms is at what cost? And so that is the process we've been learning about. Just a timeline of where we've been. We've had 3 in-person meetings and trainings with 3 teams that have been meeting off cycle as well. But where we were in December is we had the initial selection of the investments, which I'll share, and we did almost one of the hardest parts. This has been a really challenging process, especially with new faces and old faces, is how do we define success? And you might actually have 4 building leaders around the table who answer that question differently based off of when they onboarded at the district or how they see an investment practically play out in their building. And this has kind of felt like sitting in pudding. Like it's like we're making some progress, but back. But we've been coached really well to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so that's where we spent our time in December. We also took time between December and January to refine our investment definitions, and I'll get back to that. Our next meeting, though, we started learning more about identifying meaningful data elements to answer the question, is it working and for whom? And we also started mapping out costs so we could answer that 3rd and final question, at what cost? So this was a lot of teamwork and so then finally we just met on Wednesday and we started to be very specific about who was going to collect what data, when are those teams going to come back. We're going to start filling out our grid and running the math to calculate amounts and start to draw and infer some conclusions, which these 3 teams will then bring their findings and recommendations to cabinet. So this is all happening in parallel with our budgeting process, and yeah, it's been an exciting team to be a part of. And I really just wanted to acknowledge just everyone who's been involved has been really transparent, vulnerable at times, and also just it's an additional ask on people, and just been really gracious to come and attend and really dig into the work. So that's been fun. All right, so when you finish that 10-step process, or do we eliminate it? Do I, pour water on it, or do I uproot it? And I just really like the options available that we can make thoughtful and deliberate decisions, especially in a budget environment where some of those decisions are hard. So, we still have those traditional keep and eliminate, but there are times where we can identify why we need to fix something. Maybe the data reveals a tweak or a modification will do the work. Sometimes we notice that programs are really expensive and we can keep doing the work but just minimize the scope so that it's more targeted to specific students or locations. And reduce and segment and target are, they're not the same, but they're kind of similar approaches, in that really you might identify a program as like being successful and then like replicating it in very specific buildings or contexts, where I think the reduce is more like we ran a district-wide program and realized it's only effective at a couple locations. We're going to reduce in that way. And then of course expand, which is, you know, pouring the miracle grow on the plant because it's great. So a lot of options that we'll discuss as we bring our findings back. So these were the final investments that we decided to review. And I say final because a couple of them went through some shedding and metamorphosis as we really grappled with that. How do you define success, or this? So I'll share a little bit about that. So co-teaching English learners, that has been pretty true to form the entire time. Instructional coaches actually originally was a larger group. It was instructional coaches and TOSAs. And as that group started to look at defining success and looking at data, they realized they really had been given two investments in one. And so because instructional coaches are explicitly called out in our strategic plan, they decided to move forward with that one. And then the third and final one originally was K-6 class sizes. And that also is really big because you can actually talk about your model, your graduation requirements. And so just because of discussions that have come up, especially as we enter the budget season, we really decided to target that on looking at two-way immersion programming. Those classes are small, and they're small because they're a targeted intervention. And so now we just want to see if that intervention's working. So, and if is it working for who we thought it should and at what cost? All right, so that's AROI. I can either take questions as we transition subjects or at the end, whatever works best.
No, I was just wondering about the, did you say the TWE classes were targeted intervention?
I did say that.
I was hoping that you wouldn't catch that. So they're not a targeted intervention; they're a targeted investment. And there's a difference, all right? So it's not like a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention. It's we see it as just a program to help honor language, and it's really working off of our strategic plan on inclusion as well. So to that end, when we're looking at the success of it, and if we're getting our maximizing our investment, it's like how efficient is the program right now at the secondary level. So some of it is small class sizes, and so what are some of the strategies we can use to build out those classes to where they're full and robust? And then also looking at what success in a successful completion of that program looks like, and what classes need to be offered in order, especially when you get to high school. Sometimes, depending on the culture of the district, a TWE model might drop off where a IB model can pick up in junior, senior year sometimes. Or, for instance, we might be offering a class where there's not a large degree of success. One that we've been having conversations about organically is our chemistry class. Do we continue to offer that class, or do we find another Spanish language core class or science class that can replace that, where kids are going to have more success and we're going to have more kids taking the class? So those are some of the things that we're really exploring.
You mean TWE Spanish, or you mean TWE chemistry, not chemistry, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about TWE, so I was imagining that word. Yeah,
I'll just make sure.
Yeah, TWE chemistry.
Thank you.
Is that helpful? Okay, thank you.
Okay. So financial updates. Not diving into the nitty gritty today. It's been I know you will feel this way, a busy year. And as Ethan and I have onboarded, I noted to him, there are things that come up in the life cycle of a school finance official, and they come up about every 3 years. And in our 8 months, I think I've checked 6 of them happening. So part of, waiting for we'll get our first state school fund estimate. We, of course, have a baseline number because we used that during negotiations, but I'll be bringing more formal budget assumptions to you in a couple weeks at the board meeting. But just kind of a reminder of where we were. This was the slide I shared. It's a slide I've shared with administrators and managers. This was at our May budget committee meeting where we showed that despite the reductions and the use of the ending fund balance, our 2-year projection included reducing $9 million over the biennium, and it would also include, dipping into reserves and dropping the fund balance down to 6% and then 5%. We have the numbers you've heard are improved, and one of those budget estimates there was that all employees working for the Tigard-Tualatin School District would receive a 1% COLA. So the fact pattern has changed. We've been able to provide a COLA at least to one of our groups. We're still in a budget reduction or realignment situation.
Sorry, we got COLAs to everybody. You said to one of our groups, right?
Sorry, OSEA bargaining is still happening. That's
sure, but they got their COLA.
They got their retro. Yep, that matched TTEA. But specifically that group being negotiated was kind of led the catalyst. So anyway, so that was just a reminder of where we were. And then again, this was what we have been showing we specifically used this slide as the basis for some information shared with community conversations, and it just kind of shows the trend. This is the overview we've been providing to staff as we're putting together the adoption, and kind of when I talk about some of those check boxes getting checked, this is a good reminder. So
have you all seen this before? I'm not sure if I've presented this to the board or not. Nope, some are saying no. Maybe I've shown you individually. Do you mind if I jump in just for a second? Mm-hmm. So this is just a way for us. It's a accountability model, but it's our flow chart, but it also shows how much work needs to be done for us to arrive at a budget, given all the things that have occurred, especially in the green section, right? When we start with the deficit and then get an extra $2 million. And then it's also incorporating community conversations that we're having to ensure that we are engaging our community, when we're engaging our administrators, and then when we're making those decisions, and it's going to lead to an endpoint, which is the blue. And so for us, I think that this document, or this chart, it documents our journey, but it also shows a great deal of accountability from the public end and transparency on the district side.
Yeah, so thank you. So, kind of coming into the year with a missed beginning fund balance target, identifying other facts and circumstances that indicate a mid-year budget revision was necessary. We made it through December. We finalized the contract with TTEA, and to Ethan's point, then that agreed upon COLA flowing through to all the other groups. We're still in our current financials processing the impact. That will finally be done in March when the last group is caught up. So next week after next, you'll get an updated financial report, but that will be through January. We're going to use the February actual data to, continue to touch the forecast. But yeah, we received a new state school fund estimate for the current year earlier this week, late last week, Friday or Monday, I want to say.
Monday.
I'm sorry?
I think it's Monday.
Yeah, I think it was Monday too. So that indicated a little bit more funding for our district, but I always wait until the next May because nothing's final really until then, but we'll update the forecast for that. And I would just say the mid-year budget revision is going pretty successfully. I just want to thank administrators and cabinet members again for agreeing to freeze hiring for certain positions. That took a bulk of the problem. But again, some of our cabinet members have reduced their discretionary budget by 50% for the remainder of the year, and that's not easy. You know, as we've been even evaluating our budget for next year, we've always kind of looked at, well, what are the things? The things are the services that we can trim. And you know, I've been with the district for 8 months. A lot of those central departments haven't had increases in budgets, like even as a percentage, for a long time. And so it's hard to kind of go to the, you know, the paper clips or like the one-off contracted service and say that it's extra and can be reduced. So again, we're getting our new state school fund estimate next Monday. That's statutorily required. And we'll have some modeling data as we start negotiations with OSEA. And so more to come about the 25-27 budget. A couple big topics, though. We've been consistent in talking about realigning staff to student enrollment and priorities, continuing to advocate for the state school fund and special education funding, preparing for the ripple effect of federal funding pressures. Just a point of clarification, we've heard about that 5 to 10% that could potentially apply to title or IDEA. Student nutrition, of course, is much more heavily entrenched in federal funding, and total federal revenues for our district are $10 million, so at least this year. So, but yeah, so just kind of preparing for that. We know that we're going to have significant increases in property and liability insurance just because of wildfires, Oregon's risk, especially in terms of the liability side. So we've been put on notice. We have some reinsurers statewide who are not picking up coverage for the pool. And so that is something that we might have to do a risk assessment and go buy additional coverage. As a standalone district, we're planning for bargaining for OSEA. And then we also have some special committees with TTEA who are bringing some recommendations and requests back to labor management. And then, of course, I talked about some budgets just haven't been touched for a while. And specifically, those have been extracurricular programs at the secondary level and certain central operation departments. They're going to be sharing on March 6th at the community budget work group. Just they're a hardworking team. There have been a lot of unfunded mandates in terms of how they do their work, and they've always took a step aside to support students. So they're just going to share a lot of fun facts about the scope of their work. But then again, we always need to be updating substitutes, transportation, and utilities. Okay.
And are you going to talk about where we are with our budget right now in terms of the process, or should I jump in right now and just give some more detail?
For forming the 25-27 budget,
Yeah.
if you'd like to add more.
Yep, sure. So as you know, we had a $5.9 million deficit that we're trying to plan for. And I've always reassured the public that we're confident that we can get there. And I think with the work that we've done related to several sessions that we've had with our administrators, them providing input, us polling on what's important to them and how we can move things forward according to our values and our goals, and then looking at the, you go to the next slide actually, the realigning staff and student enrollment and priorities. So right now we are overstaffed technically, given that we've had declining enrollments and we've had more staff go up. So correcting for that, looking at some programming, and again, looking for efficiencies. I think we're going to be able to get to that 6 million and then some and still maintain strong student programming. And the reason I'm sharing that is because if we're able to do that, then we don't have to go through the same type of in-depth process next year, which we know is not great for morale. And it's just painful to go through year after year. So if we can just get it all like mostly done this year, we will. And when I say mostly done, if we do some really hard work and some tough decision making, but we get it to 9 million, then we can really approach the 26-27 school year through some strategy on how to modify programming, and then followed by attrition. So depending on how the next couple weeks go with us wrapping up AROI and us having a couple of more intensive work sessions at the cabinet and admin level, we will, in doing those ratio adjustments, we'll be able to see if we can get to that. I'm like ballparking 9 million. That's not exact, but that would give us confidence that we don't have to go through this process again. And then that would indicate that we've successfully implemented some systems change that will keep us from overspending in years moving forward. So I just wanted to add that on top, because I know that Jessica or Director C just gave you a bunch of information. So I want to make sure that you hear some of those strategy that we're using moving forward and what we're hopeful for.
Thank you, Dr. Udo. Just wondering, is there a way to see, Director C, I'm wondering if there's a way to see a little bit farther out of a timeline, because our decline in enrollment is projected to continue for a little bit and then reverse temporarily as we have some of our communities fill out with new development, at which point we'll probably continue with a longer term declining enrollment trend based on an aging population and fewer kids generally in Oregon and in our district. And so I'm interested in seeing where that inflection point lies so we can plan for it, because I wouldn't want to make cuts, for example, like the year before that inflection point and then have to hire people back. Or is that inflection point a little farther out?
So, and I know the inflection point you're talking about. I'm not sure if that recovery is going to be significant enough for us to make investments or to slow us down in terms of the projected reductions that we're making at this point. Now, we won't have an answer to that either way until we see what the legislature comes up with the state school fund. And then that's when we'll be able to say, well, this is how many students we're anticipating on having, and here's what the state school fund is, and here's where we can start planning a little bit more 4 years out or 5 years out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the inflection point we could see, and then we could plug in the budget dump numbers. Like even if we have part of it, that's better than nothing, I guess.
No, we can do that, but we won't be able to do
not the financial part, but
yeah,
like, I hear you. But even if we had like just part of the story, it would still be useful to see like where that point, the demographic is going to be, and then I guess we can extrapolate the other part if we won't get all the state school fund for like 10 years because we just won't know. But like even if we just
Yeah, thank you. When we go into, so we will take that into account, and we're doing that with our boundary work, for instance. And it's really important that we do that and acknowledge that we're going to have this little bump, and we'll incorporate that into our strategic planning as well. Thank you. Dr. C, you going to bring us home on this one?
Yeah. So I also had a slide about the economic forecast. A couple different numbers, but just not in conflict. Just COSA focuses on state and lottery funds. Sorry. So where the 350 million was the total forecast, we look at the amount available to us. Both are totally good. So specifically 267.5 million are available in the general fund and lottery resources. And, just with the impact that Director Zerschmied referred to at the federal level, I really feel like our focus is on special education. If we can get additional money in the state school fund, you referred to the decrease in Medicaid, which of course is a statewide priority. That was also a resource and a program that we've had a work team looking at this year and increasing as a source of bringing in money, like financially taking credit for the good work we do every day in serving students. So we're active in the Medicaid survey, but we were really looking at setting up a robust direct billing program. And so now that work team's like, okay, what do we do? Especially if we're looking at realignment and system, like reviewing systems, where do we put our time? So I was excited to see 267 million and no, even before the federal changes, there are a lot of hands at the table. And so I think that would be the impact, like the fact I would share. The other thing that stood out to me is that the statewide reserve account, so the Educational Stability Fund, Rainy Day Fund, and cash reserves now approximate about 19.8% of the general fund budget. And who's not jealous of of that? Like, it's great. It supports all of us, you know, to weather a downturn, but it's pretty impressive statewide to have that reserve.
So I'm wondering if there wouldn't be an avenue forward where we are lobbying to have some of that reserve tapped if Medicaid is in fact cut. That might be a really useful thing for us to consider as an advocacy piece.
I think that's reasonable, and I especially remember the 23-25 session when we weren't sure if we were going to get to 10.2. There were a lot of superintendents that were like, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, especially when you're treating or serving students. So, yeah, I think that's worth exploring. So, yeah, that was it for the economic forecast update. Okay, and then finally, this is a transition slide we shared back in October, but so we have statewide budget needs, continuing to advocate, and we're going to pivot to talk about our community budget work groups. So that's our posture of transparency. We have the 4 groups scheduled. 2 of them are in the rearview mirror, and then we have 2 ahead. So I'd like to, point this out. Next week, we have a back-to-back, and it's on Thursday, March 6th. So please come to Byram, check it out. We're, like I mentioned, those directors in charge of operations and auxiliary services are going to come and talk about the nuances of what it takes to literally keep the lights on in your students' building. And then March 19th, this is where we will try to answer any questions that have developed throughout the process, and also ask for some, like we've been asking for observations to be shared, and I'll share those themes from our first group. But having a specific targeted activity to ask people to provide feedback about as we continue to pull all of the strings together to put a budget before you in May. Like we want to hear parent and volunteer and community member and staff member voice. So with that, I was just going to actually, Gustavo, can you hit that hyperlink? Will it work? I think that was a point of that CBW1 themes. Oh, sorry. What was that? Yeah, I will do that. And is that you individually or the generic email? Okay. I'm just going to add both of you. All right, so as a process for providing, thank you, just as a process of providing feedback, and I'm not sure if we can zoom in just to scotch, we're having parking lots, and we'll reset up our parking lots from last week, because we ended with this great optimistic closure, and didn't steer people to the parking lot, but we have these are just some of the questions that came up that we're going to answer at that last session. So there was this generic, just kind of more general question, that potpourri area of that things that people were interested in. And then if we can scroll down to the bond, we can see some of the questions and indicators of support for our program. So getting to hear principal voice and be in an actual building that could potentially be impacted, I think is pretty powerful. I would even say sitting at cafeteria tables for 2 hours might also have been helpful. Well, on the eve of a Sunday. This next section is ADMW, so just, some opportunities to go back and clarify things. And then state school fund. I really love the people who love the detail. Yes, there is a master spreadsheet, and we can email ODE if you would like to take a look at it, so we can see parents are wondering what's going to happen with federal funding. How does that ripple out to you? How can we help? So yeah, just really encouraged by this is getting to be my first year at the process. Really encouraged at the involvement, people leaning in, and just the care that people are taking to prepare their materials. So yeah.
And I just wanted to add on this, our approach that we took last year's model and revised it so that there's a very clear theme to each date. We want to have a lot of community interaction, so the opportunity to speak, to ask questions, to roll up their sleeves, and then also find the through line. So the first date was really on state school fund and the spreadsheet type of stuff that people who love looking at data and understanding how the big system works was focused on that. The second session was talking about MTSS, so looking at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supports, inclusion, ninth grade success, student coaches, etc. And how does that funding, how does that through line go to funding and other instructional services? And what does that cost us to do? And what's the success been from that? So that parents see a through line of where that big funding is actually playing out in schools. And the third session will be like, how do we keep the lights on? How do we keep our grounds safe, classrooms clean, kids fed, transported, and ready for kids, or ready for school? So, or schools ready for kids rather. So we're trying to bring what can be sometimes an intimidating aspect of budget to life for parents to really, and families and community really understand. And Director C and her team have just done an outstanding job too of, we meet a couple times a week to make sure that we're ready, to make sure that our team is confident that they can deliver a event and a presentation that is palatable and accessible to families. So kudos to you. Any questions?
So I really appreciate all the work done, and I see the community engagement and noticing some of the questions about federal funding. I'm wondering if there's just uncertainty as to if we would lose federal funding, if it's reasonably plausible, at what point as a board are we going to discuss kind of contingency planning?
Yeah, so I think that comes back to our last agenda item where we're talking about federal updates. We're working really closely again with OASBO, with COSA, with OSBA, and with other local districts, some of which that are engaged in this process around federal funding. We know we're good for the rest of the year for federal funding, and then we are going to see what begins to unfold. Right now, there's a confidence that a lot of these indictments or threats of reducing federal fund are unlawful. Therefore, we haven't we've calculated what the loss would be if we didn't have those, but we don't have a current contingency plan to backfill if we don't have a federal funds for meals or transportation reimbursement or whatever it might be. But too much uncertainty, and so we'd be pouring energy into something right now that would come at a cost to other important planning and work that needs to be done.
I was just going to mention that there are so many of these executive orders that come through and then are struck down by courts. Or
correct.
And then we would be asking district staff to be like, plan for that thing that just came through, and then a week later it's like, deemed constitutional or against the law, and like we would be constantly asking staff to rewrite the budget.
And the current budget, like deficit planning that we have for the deficit we know we actually have, is taking a lot away from us being able to invest our time and energy into innovative instructional practices, right? Our professional development in certain areas. So we don't want to compound that just yet unless we know it's reality.
Yeah, that's helpful. Just wanted to kind of take a pulse on where we were all, like what that looked like. So thank you.
Definitely.
I just wanted to share some good news. You know, I think we've received a lot of attention about executive orders coming out through January, but I did do the happy dance here in the boardroom on Monday because the Supreme Court upheld the E-rate lawsuit. So that has been working through the court system, and that is a significant program, which we'll talk about next week. But even before the election, there have been a lot of, just like through the legal process, a lot of programs that impact students. And I just love the AASA website. There's a lot of just great information to stay up to date, and we really lean on them as a state association, especially with the districts that are larger than 10,000 students. We really look to ASBO and AASA to help us respond. And like I participated in a federal survey about Medicaid and the impact to our district last week. But yeah, great resources.
And I think we do need to wrap up. Is there anything else for the good? Thank you so much, Director C.
Of course.
Enjoy your weekend. Okay, so I think everyone, even though we have 25 minutes left, I do want to recommend a 3-minute stretch break. Okay, and then come back at 4:37, 4:38, whatever 3 minutes is from now.
Recess till
4:38.
4:38.
Thank you.
I was not saying how much longer. I know, like, I'm getting a photograph of that.
Nowhere the stage. And Larry's strong. Larry's strong. You know he's an O line for the Bees. Dude is like solid. Yeah, he's solid. Gonna reconvene.
All right, we are coming back from recess. It's 4:38, and we will continue with our last agenda item, which is superintendent evaluation.
Thank you very much. So when we met in August, I walked you through a presentation based on your input around my areas of focus for my evaluation for the 24-25 six. Take three. The 24-25 school year. And the two areas that you all emphasized strongly were to keep it simple and to focus on two areas. The first area was around relationship building and in community engagement. And the second part was around identifying and communicating a district focus. So for the first part, I feel like there's been a lot of effort towards that, and we'll definitely be able to deliver on it. And the second part we're still working on as well, which is the finding the focus. But I couldn't help but think that there it is. All right, so I couldn't help but think that when you look at OSBA standards, there's a few other standards that I may want to incorporate into my evaluation in addition to those two areas, because there are some accomplishments that we're going to be able to make as a district under my leadership that I think are worthy of documenting. A couple that stand out to me right now are the local option levy, the budget piece, and getting a collective bargaining agreement in the fashion in which we did. And then if we get that bond, that would also be something worth celebrating. And so to that end, I wonder if one thing that I'd like to get input from you all on before I really roll up my sleeves on the evaluation process and going back and forth with you all on this is, are there any other criteria that you would like to consider? And one thing that I did was I added for your resource the OSBA Superintendent Evaluation Fillable Work Form in a shared document in a folder for you just to look at and get a sense of things that school boards look for in a superintendent's performance evaluation. And then also, what's the timeline for when we should complete this evaluation, and then what's the format for which is most palatable for you. I know that some superintendents have evaluations that are somewhere in the ballpark of 35 to 55 pages, and that works for some boards.
Maybe if we had
you notice how I'm never
members.
saying anything negative. I said that works for some boards, right? And as you know, my communication, as you see on my weekly updates, err on the side of being concise, being very much direct and to the point, and I do that so that information for you all is accessible. So to that end, my plan is to present artifacts to you all related to my evaluation in a manner that is very concise and to the point as well. So I guess what I'd like to open for the dialogue is first, does the criteria right now, which is district culture and establishing a vision and adopting OSBA criteria or any other additional OSBA criteria, does that look good? And what OSBA criteria would you like to adopt that's not already articulated on there? And one thing while people are about to dive in, I know that Chair Irvin on numerous occasions said, we really just want you to focus on these two things. So if those are the things that you would like me to focus on, I'd be happy to continue to focus on those as well.
So I'm thinking about some of those OSBA standards, like the visionary leadership. My understanding of what we had talked about was that that would follow naturally from the two that we assigned to you. So I don't think we need to go back and add
Perfect.
that. And that's, I think, also fits with the, what was the other one, the ethics and professional norms, standard two, yeah. Hang on, let me pull up the instructional leadership one. I feel like it's still premature for that one. It doesn't feel, I mean, it's, let me rephrase that. It's not that it's not important, but it's not as important for year one. I mean, it's always important. I don't know what you guys think. We could add it or not. But I mean, everything we had was on the communication and community relations.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to just share is that in terms of establishing a vision, it for me it feels like what I would like, how I like to proceed with that is actually establishing a plan to really drilling down that vision for next year, right? So taking our AROI process, our community, all the input from our fall community engagement and our budget workshops and any other community engagement, information from our integrated guidance planning, which is a robust and state norms process. And then we're doing an internal systems health check. So organizing a process to go through all of those things. And then in my evaluation say, and then I'll do some more, probably 8 to 12 weeks worth of touching base with staff, doing some, looking at student achievement, looking at results from our upbeat survey and say, we have all these artifacts. I've engaged in all these things. Here's my preliminary recommendation to the board. And the area that I've been leaning at right now so far has been around stability. Like, so there's attendance, there's financial stability. And I know that doesn't sound like super appealing, but it's really critical and important just to get stability from a financial standpoint. Yeah. Okay, good. And I was like, this doesn't get people super excited, but like when I look into the next few years, we need stability. And we need stability from a financial standpoint and from a leadership standpoint and an instructional standpoint, right? So leadership development are some preliminary areas that I've come up with. How do we, especially with less resources and probably less overall support staff in general, how will we build capacity in our leaders? That's leaders from a superintendent standpoint, from a cabinet, from our building leaders, and then growing staff into leaders. How will we invest in that? And then finally, academic alignment. So those are the 4 areas that I'm looking at right now that I'd like to incorporate into, like, almost generate a report on my evaluation of how I'd like to recommend we move forward. But that doesn't necessarily nail it down to one specific area of focus. So that's the only thing I'd ask as a modifier, is me articulating a blueprint or a pathway for getting there at the end of the year, and then doing that, really drilling down and doing that work next year.
So you're saying basically outlining
Yeah,
the plan
an outline. Yep.
So then we have our evaluation tool for next year just sealed already.
Yeah, this will be locked in. Yep.
So I feel like just my initial thoughts, I really like attendance. I think that's really straightforward to include. Financial stability, agree, it's not like fun to do, but it would be good to get there. And I had a question. I'm interested just a little bit more on what you mean by academic alignment.
Yeah, so we have a lot of programming. So an example is our curriculum adoption process. We do a fairly successful job of adopting curriculum. And then the next step, especially at a secondary level, I'll speak on secondary, and I don't think they would mind me saying this, is to what extent are we building capacity to incorporate that adopted curriculum with fidelity, and using interim assessments, formative assessments, and summative assessments to ensure that that math curriculum or that language arts curriculum at Tigard High School in Teacher A's classroom is close in fidelity to what the standards and the curriculum that's being used in the Tualatin classroom in Teacher B's class, right? And that's across, especially when you have a relatively large district, making sure that we have alignment and programmatic alignment. The work we're doing with TWE is another example. Is how are we doing a vertical alignment with TWE, and then in two different middle schools and two different high schools, having programmatic alignment, and our curriculum articulation plan is work that needs to be done.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate that.
No
Yeah,
problem.
I feel like we want all of our kids to have similar robust opportunities no matter what school they're at, right? So making sure it's implemented everywhere makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
So I've seen first year superintendent evaluations go a couple of ways. And I think both are useful, and I think a collaborative conversation between the board and the superintendent is really important because this is meant to be a collaborative process. I have seen, so using the OSBA standards, I've seen boards pick a couple and say these are the ones that we're going to focus on. I've also seen all 8 be used, but with the understanding that there's context involved and that this is the first year, but that it provides a good baseline for feedback, and that that this is first year. Do we expect that a full 5-year relationship with the community be developed? No, we do not. But what is the feedback for the first year? With respect to a 40-page evaluation kind of thing. So my the way that I see this being used most useful. Well, I don't know what evaluations have looked like in the past. I have no idea how that's gone really. But in my experience, and this is again I think a place for a real collaboration as to what should this look like, what should the artifact be at the end of this that is most useful, because we want our superintendent to leave with good guidance from us, but also something that is useful, that is a one voice evaluation from the board, is literally a 1 to 2 page thing that has here's the standard, here's 2 or 3 comments, full stop, right? They are really concise, targeted comments, and give guidance, not little tiny specific examples. They're not a compilation of everything everybody said, but here's the message from the board and move on to the next standard. And that's the process, or the most useful thing that I've seen given to a superintendent.
Last year was a bit of an anomaly. In the past, prior to that, we've taken a rubric, and I think we could even make it more concise, but it was, here's the standard, here's what we saw as evidence, and sort of the kudos, and then here, if there were any areas for increased capacity, or like to see more of this, or things of that nature. And so I think we could do something similar. And I kind of think of this year and the next probably 3 years, in sales, you have ramp up. So it's just that idea of, here's these areas of focus. You will hit things in all 8 of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think it's important for your body of work and evidence to, you would have for your own self, artifacts for each one of those, but we will really be, taking the deeper dive on a couple of those ones, which, as other people pointed out, really do have through lines to a lot of the other pieces, and things that we could point out, even if you weren't necessarily going to focus on them for your artifacts. We would be able to point out, here's where we saw, visionary leadership. Here's where we saw governance and legislative advocacy, or whatever those things are. And so I think it's that blend. And then, yes, I think I can share, and I may have done this in August, but I can share another blank of like the rubric that we then as a board fill out so we can kind of see and then tailor that because it will be a little bit different since we're not necessarily going to be, I mean, we could pinpoint things in every standard, even though that wasn't the expectation for you. I think we would then also be able to say, you have done all these other things, and here's where you really like sort of drilled down into those two focus areas.
Even as you were talking about like, here's where I want to focus, I was like, oh, you're literally talking about every standard.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I have the feedback I need to move forward, which is continue to be concise, continue to drill down. I feel like just by some affirmation that I have, it's satisfactory for me to not have one area of focus per se, but the fact that I'm drilling down to it and going to arrive at maybe a couple of really specific and clean areas of focus that people can get behind is acceptable to the board as well. Okay, so and then what I would like to do is set a target date of coming back to the board mid-April, maybe. Does that sound good? Like maybe a month and a half or in May, just with some preliminaries for you to consider with this process being finalized in late May, early June?
Yeah, because I was going to say in the past, we've had 2 executive sessions, and maybe we don't need 2 in May, like the performance review part 1 and part 2, depending on how, and that was, you know, Dr. Sue had a very robust folder of evidence. And so, which was great. We may not need, just the way that we're setting this up, need to, but we had the performance review part 1 and part 2. And then this year, looking at the calendar, it would fall on June 23rd, which is when that last one in June is when we have the agreement with the superintendent and the superintendent evaluation. So that would kind of be what that timeline would look like for you if you want to keep it how it's been in the past.
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Is there anything in the contract? Is there anything in your contract about when it has to be done?
I did not see anything in the contract. Okay. I know that in general, it happens, I think it happens normally in May at the latest.
But part of the reason we needed multiple board meetings last time was because it had like more of a narrative approach that took a little more like back and forth and discussion and work. And so I'm wondering if we have more of a concise approach, maybe it could be a bit of a shorter timeline if we did it that way, but I don't know.
Right, so that's what I was saying. We might not need the 2, and we could use the 2 in May, 1 for the review, and then the board meet, because 1 is in a board meeting, you know, public meeting, but we could just look at that second one in May. Even could be the agreement and the evaluation, and then the one prior to that could be the performance review.
Okay,
but we can tinker with that.
Yep. So what I'll do is take the information that I've received from you for now, and I will develop a document that's similar. Do you remember my 100-day plan that I submitted to you? Like similar readability to that. That was like a 13-page doc with a lot of photos. So it'll be a little bit more concise than that, hopefully. But to that end, I will incorporate some of these things that I spoke about and the input and the feedback that I have from you all, and be ready to present that to you sometime in April. And then with the goal for us to have a collaborative exchange and complete this by the 2nd week of May.
Sounds good.
And somehow
2 minutes.
We managed to do that whole thing in 3.5 hours. Give me that. Yeah.
Woo, I know.
Oh, you want to adjourn this thing?
Yeah. I would ask for any final comments or questions. I should. Yeah. Let's discuss numbers. With that, I will adjourn this TTSD mid-year retreat at 4:58.